She found herself inside a fantasy novel as a possessed villain who terrorizes everyone around her. The hand splashed the glass, and the face, clothes, hair, everything became wet and smelled of light notes of alcohol. The lady who poured the champagne covered her mouth with her hand, pretending not to notice that Lady Lindsay was there. The courtiers giggled quietly at the sight of the lady, who looked like a wet mouse. A smirk flashed across Charlotte's face. She wiped the champagne from her face and said that everything was fine, because now her hair had a fresh, fruity scent, which was quite pleasant. Such a calm reaction caused discontent and even irritation. In the eyes of the ladies, this looked ridiculous, because now Lindsay was pretending to be kind. The girl walked across the hall and found herself alone in the room. Her gaze darkened, drops of alcohol still dripping from her face. She wondered who had sent her this invitation, since it could not be ignored, since it was from the imperial family. Charlotte knew they weren't kind to her, but still, throwing a drink at them out of the blue was a bit much. However, the girl couldn't blame them after what the real Lindsay had done. The lady publicly asked her for forgiveness, promising that it would not happen again, and Charlotte slapped her with all her might. She covered herself with her fan, saying that she would prefer never to see that face again. Charlotte looked the girl straight in the eyes and said it was disgusting. The heroine found herself inside a fantasy novel called In Search of a Husband. Charlotte Lindsay was an obsessive villain who clung to Duke Hicklid, the protagonist. In the end, she even dared to make an attempt on the main character herself, Ayla. This enraged Duke Hicklid. According to the plot, this pressure was supposed to force Lindsay's family to disown her. The man sitting at the table folded his hands and asked if she had anything to say in her defense. The girl stood in front of her father with her head down, her hands shaking, her teeth clenched. Charlotte fell on her knees and cried out piteously that she was wrong. Luckily, the heroine was transported to that very moment, so a humble plea helped her avoid punishment. But what else could she do? She couldn't afford to end up on the street. Eventually, her father said he would send her to an estate abroad in 6 months if she could only hold out until then. Charlotte froze in surprise, looking at the ladies who were crowded in one place. Seeing what was going on, she herself opened her mouth in surprise and barely managed to close it. All these girls crowded together to greet Kiriel. He is a minor male character in the novel, a brilliant magician and likely the future master of the tower. Charlotte quickly stood behind the door, her face lit up like a match at the sight of the real Kiriel. He turned out to be more handsome than even described in the novel. She thought, because if Kiriel was here, then he must be here too. Charlotte turned towards the blinding radiance that was so blinding to her eyes. Reinhard Waldeck Leckenberg, another minor figure, walked down the red carpet. He was the crown prince of the Lechenberg Empire. The girl couldn't stop blushing, her cheeks were burning, and the beauty of Crown Prince Reynard was so bright that she had to cover her face. The heroine didn't think that a forced visit would allow her to see the two most desirable men. She abruptly stopped the flow of thoughts, because now is not the time for this, since there is a more important problem. Charlotte walked out the door and headed in the opposite direction to get out of there as quickly as possible. She stood by the wall and looked around warily. There was no one nearby. Just as she was about to slip out of the palace unnoticed, she bumped head-on into someone's figure. It was painful enough that the girl covered her mouth with her hand. She bumped into not just anyone, but the novel's protagonist, Cedric Hicklid, who reprimanded the girl, saying that she would never get tired of it. Next to him, arm in arm, stood Isla Bean, the second heroine Charlotte had never wanted to cross paths with, and she had turned completely pale because of her failed attempt to escape in this situation. Hicklid asked if his previous warning had not been enough, and the girl tried to explain to his lordship that there had been a misunderstanding. The ladies who were watching this scene spoke quietly, but enough to be heard, that Lady Lindsay was again trying to approach his lordship and his bride. Where did such fearlessness come from? Charlotte backed down and apologized for the confrontation, adding that his lordship should bill Lindsay's house for the laundry. The man could barely contain himself. He shouted that he hadn't finished telling her where she was going, but Ayla gently grabbed the groom by the shoulder, asking him to stop. Cedric didn't back down. He wanted to hear what Lindsay's excuse was this time. A low, hollow voice told his lordship to get out of the way. Eugene Mont was also a minor character in the novel. He is the commander of a mercenary corps called the Heart, and also a border count of the Lechenberg Empire. His lordship smiled tensely and said that he had not thought the count was interested in royal banquets. The man looked through the helmet that hid his face with his red eyes. He warned that he would not repeat himself twice, but still told them to get out. His lordship put his arm around the bride's shoulders and, turning to the commander, led the girl behind him. Eugene turned his head to ask Lindsay if she was okay. But Charlotte was no longer in the palace. She took advantage of the situation and, picking up the hem of her dress, ran as far as her heels would allow her. In the courtyard, the girl stopped to catch her breath and said that Eugene had appeared just in time. She couldn't help but admire him. It was no wonder he was her favorite character in this novel, even if his role was very small. Charlotte exhaled and thought that she would hardly ever run into him, because she was not the main character like Isla. A villain should never get involved with those who love the heroine, so Charlotte decided to keep her distance, play her role, and live quietly. The girl still didn't understand how she ended up in this book, but as long as she could live peacefully, it would suit her. Charlotte closed her eyes after an emotional day. She felt a little lonely, but there was nothing she could do about it. The door to Lindsay's balcony swung open. The noise in the room made her wake up. She barely had time to realize what was happening when the man was already covering her mouth with his hand, asking her not to scream. Charlotte turned pale when she saw the crown prince standing in front of her, who was also covering her mouth with his hand. Reynard apologized for the suddenness, but he came to Lady Lindsay with a request. After these words, he removed his hand from Charlotte's face, and the girl stared at him in surprise. The crown prince knelt before her and said that he wanted Lady Lindsay to let him sleep in her bed. Charlotte winced in shock, her eyes widening. The man knew she must have thought he was crazy, but Reynard could explain everything. He sat on the edge of the bed and, looking down at the floor, covered his face with his hand. The crown prince admitted that lately, when he goes to bed, he hears a voice. It's a terrifyingly realistic hallucination that whispers in his ear over and over again. The man cursed. He had heard the voice so many times that he could repeat it letter for letter. The author tells him that the main character belongs to the heroine, so he will take a secondary protagonist. A voice called his name and told him to go to bed right now. Charlotte's shock turned to fear. She clutched the blanket with her hands, as if a little more and she would disappear under it with her head. The heroine, Isla Bean, cannot inherit the title unless she marries. Forced to find a husband, she ends up staying with her childhood friend. With the Northern Duke Cedric Hicklid, a typical ending. In this way, the novel's status became complete. Sitting on the sofa under the blanket, the reader cursed, because what about the ending, where everyone lives together? What happened to all the other secondary characters? She didn't like this ending. The girl indignantly muttered that this was completely unacceptable. The heroine was struck by a realization, because in the comments, readers wrote that the secondary characters were much more charming than Cedric. People asked for their lives, and the girl wrote that she would take the rest of the men into bed. Charlotte clutched her head, because it was her comment, and this is what it led to. Suddenly, the crown prince said that although he did not know what this voice meant, it made him think of Charlotte. His instincts tell him to go to her bed. Reynard looked Lady Lindsay sternly in the eyes and asked her not to tell him that she had cursed him. Unable to stop the trembling in her body, the girl looked away and replied that it was impossible, and Reynard, as if nothing had happened, thought that it was okay then. He crossed his arms over his chest and smirked, knowing that a lady without magic couldn't be the culprit, and besides, Cedric's so-called leech wouldn't waste her time cursing him. The heroine was glad that he didn't suspect her, but for some reason these words seemed offensive. Reynard said that because of this voice he had 10 nights of insomnia, so he came to sleep in Charlotte's bed. The girl blushed and said that it was a bit too much for a man and a woman to share the same bed, to which the crown prince said that she would sleep somewhere else. Lindsay was lost in thought when a shirt flew into her face. The girl removed the cloth from her face and looked at it to see what had been thrown at her. The crown prince stood before her with his shirt off, apologizing and asking her to understand him. Wrapping his robe around himself, he said that he was dead tired and could collapse at any moment. The girl froze with a red face, speechless from such a naked revelation. She turned sharply and wished the crown prince good night. Charlotte quickly walked into the other room and closed the door behind her. She was upset, because she did not want the secondary character to kick her out of her own bed. The girl stood by the window, trying to come to her senses after what had happened, because Reynard had even come to her with his pajamas, but how could a minor noblewoman refuse the future emperor? The crown prince opened the door and called the lady. The girl said that he could ask for anything. She would arrange everything. But that wasn't the point. The man understood that throwing out his mistress and taking her bed would be impudent, so he would simply take a blanket and sleep on the sofa. The crown prince ended up taking the bed and Lindsay the sofa, but thanks to the blanket she wasn't as cold. Charlotte was already dreaming 10 times, but Reynard couldn't sleep and began to wake the lady. The girl sat up and asked in a sleepy voice what was wrong, and he replied that he couldn't sleep. He leaned his elbows on the back of the sofa and said that at first he thought he would be able to fall asleep, but soon the drowsiness disappeared. Reynard leaned forward and chuckled thoughtfully, looking at the girl. He pointed his finger at the sofa on which she was lying. The Crown Prince calmly said that he wanted to sleep on it and for Charlotte to give it to him. Lindsay was sleepy as hell, and naturally she wasn't too keen on the idea of giving up the couch. For some reason, Reynard wanted to lie on the sofa, so they switched places. Charlotte lay down on the bed and puffed out her cheeks angrily. Although she felt more comfortable in bed, she began to feel as if the Crown Prince was mocking her. Not even an hour had passed when he woke her up again, saying that he felt he still needed a bed. He didn't know why, but the sofa didn't suit him. Charlotte crossed her arms over her chest in indignation. Her eyebrows suddenly rose and her gaze cleared as realization dawned. The girl clutched her nightgown in her fingers in doubt. She looked up at the man and asked if maybe he needed to sleep with her. The Crown Prince closed his eyes wearily and, giving up, replied that he thought the same thing. He needed not just her bed, but a place next to her. There was a silence in the air, as if at that moment both were waiting for the other to appear first. The Crown Prince coughed and leaned towards the lady to ask properly. With his hand on his chest in a bow, Reynard asked if Lady Lindsay would be so kind as to lie down next to him. Blood rushed to the girl's cheeks and she gasped quietly. Embarrassed and covering her face with her hand, Charlotte looked down and gave permission. She moved back on the bed, making room for the Crown Prince. He leaned towards her again, saying that there was one thing she had to promise him. Lindsay smiled awkwardly at the request. He wanted her to keep quiet about the fact that he was cursed with terrible insomnia. The heroine promised to keep it a secret. After all, the Crown Prince of the Empire has plenty of enemies. The second rule that Reynard put forward was that Charlotte should not fall in love with him. This request sounded like a joke. The girl did not understand how to react to it. She remembered that Reynard, as a minor character, was supposed to be a narcissist, but with his perfect public image, it slipped her mind. However, that was not all. The Crown Prince was about to make a third request. He took out a sword from behind his wrapped robe. Charlotte was scared and almost jumped, but the man placed him in the middle of the bed. The Crown Prince told her with a smile not to cross the sword, for when he was asleep, even the slightest touch would cause him to reflexively strike. The heroine, smiling nervously, thanked Reynard for the warning. After they finally settled down, a new problem arose. Now Charlotte couldn't sleep. She lay on the pillow and looked at the ceiling, smiling from her nerves and everything she had experienced. While Reynard slept like a baby, his lips were slightly parted and his breathing was even. So the night passed, and early in the morning the Crown Prince stretched out by the bed, saying that it was the best sleep he had had in a long time, which cannot be said about Lindsay. While the man was getting dressed, the heroine asked if he had heard any more voices, and surprisingly, there were no more hallucinations. Only yesterday they did not stop, and now there was silence. This made the heroine happy, because now she was free and could sleep peacefully without a sword at her side. As he left, Reynard told the lady that he owed her a favor, so Charlotte should think about what she wanted in return. Sitting in bed, the girl was surprised by how easy the Crown Prince's farewell had been. She wondered what she wanted, but really, Charlotte just hoped life would stay simple. Lady Lindsay went out into the city, accompanied by her personal knight George. The girl was dying of hunger, and she couldn't even imagine that sleeping after Reynard left would make her miss lunch. But it paid off that she behaved well enough that her father gave her pocket money for the first time in a long time. As soon as Lindsay took out the bag of coins, it was snatched from her hands. She turned around and shouted that it was a thief, but George stood his ground. The lady asked the knight to catch him, but the boy replied that he could not. He propped his head up with his hands and replied that it was his duty to protect her, and if he ran away and something happened to her, he would be held accountable. Charlotte grabbed George and pointed at the thief, shouting that he was running away and needed to be caught, but the knight insisted that her safety was more important than money. There was a loud scream and the girl looked around. The commander of the mercenary corps somehow ended up on this street and managed to knock down the thief, breaking his arm. Eugene Mont looked up at the owner of the stolen money. George put his hand on the hilt of his sword and asked who was in front of him. Eugene, without answering, silently handed the heroine a bag of money. Charlotte gasped and thanked her savior. However, George suddenly stood up in front of my lady, asking her to step back, because this guy was suspicious. The heroine calmly asked the knight to let her through. She, holding her hand on George's shoulder, said coldly that he was the suspicious one here. The boy tilted his head and asked in confusion what she meant. Charlotte asked why he refused to obey her order and did not chase the thief, to which the knight, looking away, answered the same thing. He was worried about her safety. The heroine continued that the one who was worried about her safety allowed her to run straight into a thief, the Marquise's knight, who can't even stop a pickpocket. She added that they would find out everything when they asked the thief whether he had an accomplice or not, and that's when George got nervous. A few hours later, the guards took away not only the thief, but also Lady Lindsay's knight. The girl turned to the commander, asking if his name was Eugene Mont, the king of mercenaries, Baron Mont. She didn't even know how to address him. The heroine bowed to him, holding her dress with her fingertips, and thanked him for his help. Charlotte was worried whether she was being too rude, and whether he was thanking him correctly. After all, her favorite character was standing right in front of her. The man told her to just call him Eugene. Blushing, the girl asked, "How about a handshake?" and the man didn't mind, but first he wanted to ask something. Suddenly there was a loud scream. Someone was calling for his sister. Lady Lindsay turned around and saw a red-haired boy who said, "Here she is." Jaden Lindsay was Charlotte's younger brother, and according to the plot, he was the heir to the Marquise. The heroine turned sharply to him. Interrupting the failed handshake, Jaden said that the guards had suddenly come to the estate and that his mother was worried, so he needed to return home immediately. Smiling, the boy asked his sister if she was hurt. A chill ran through Lindsay's body from his smile. She didn't understand why her brother was acting so strange. Usually he can't stand her. The heroine decided to do as he said, so she quickly looked back at Eugene and apologized. She had to go. The commander was left alone in the middle of the street, watching Lady Lindsay leave, asking what was wrong with her brother today, but he pretended not to know what she was talking about. Eugene's hand remained hanging in the air. He said out loud that she was gone again. Night had fallen. The girl had already managed to change into her sleepwear and went out onto the balcony. She understood why George acted the way he did. No knight wanted to serve a master who brought shame on the family, and Charlotte had often taken her anger out on servants before. And yet, thanks to this confusion, at least the disrespectful ones were replaced. Charlotte did not expect that even Jaden would intervene. While the girl was looking at the sky and thinking about a quiet life, someone's fingers caught on the edge of the balcony. Suddenly, a black cloak fluttered in the air, blocking the view of the full moon. Eugene Mont jumped onto the railing and now stood right in front of the heroine without a helmet. Lindsay gasped in surprise but didn't move. Looking at the lady with his deep red eyes, he asked if she remembered him. The cold moonlight fell on the two of them, illuminating the night with its bright veil. Eugene Mont is a figure whose value attracts the attention of influential people, a man renowned for his monstrous strength on countless battlefields, earning him the nickname the King of Mercenaries. No one ever saw his face without a helmet. That's why everyone was afraid of Eugene. But contrary to this frightening image, in fact, behind the mask hid an incredibly beautiful man. He was so full of boyish charm that Charlotte couldn't help but think that having such a face and body was simply cheating. Eugene came down from the balcony and, addressing Lindsay as you, said affirmatively that she recognized him. The man smiled, adding that this was the first time. Charlotte gasped softly, blushing, not knowing what to say. Suddenly she exclaimed that she recognized him by the voice she had heard during the day. Then Eugene calmly asked if she was not surprised. The girl awkwardly scratched the back of her head, replying that she was very surprised by his sudden visit, but she herself thought that this man really did resemble his character in the book. He was very laconic in his speech. The man said he had something to say. The girl asked what was the matter, and he asked her to speak freely. Embarrassed, the girl looked away and said that from now on she would simply call him Eugene. In fact, she was very happy because she was talking to her favorite character. As they were leaving the balcony, she asked him why he had come to her. The man pointed his finger at the bed and calmly replied that he wanted to sleep in it. Charlotte asked if he had insomnia, and when he nodded, she also dared to ask about the voices. Eugene explained that the voice told him to go to her bed. It mentioned red hair, and now Lindsay understood why the man kept trying to talk to her. He tilted his head slightly to the side. As if studying the girl, it seemed amazing to him that she understood him well. The heroine looked down. She thought that his destructive power was beyond imagination. That fearless Eugene, whom she had only seen in the original, turned out to be so cute. Charlotte turned to him and pointed her finger down before he got into bed. The man immediately realized what was going on. His shoes were covered in mud. The heroine decided to bring him some pajamas. Since he helped her during the day, she asked him not to go outside under any circumstances, and if someone showed up, they needed to hide. The man sat down on the sofa and briefly replied that he understood. Entering the laundry room, the girl looked around in search of pajamas. Perhaps there would be servants' clothes here. She did find something after all. While the girl was looking at the pajamas, which seemed too pretentious to her, Jaden appeared at the door and asked his sister what she wanted from his pajamas. It happened so suddenly that Charlotte not only didn't have time to put her pajamas back in place, but also didn't have time to come up with an excuse, so she hesitated. She figured there was dust on her clothes, so she decided to shake it off to clean it. Jaden crossed his arms over his chest and said that he would pretend that her story was true. Charlotte felt awkward, but she still asked why her brother had been so kind to her lately if he didn't like her. He decided to ask a counter question, namely whether she didn't think that she had been acting strange lately since she had suddenly abandoned Duke Hicklid, was not throwing tantrums and was not causing problems. These lists from her brother hit the girl on the head like a hammer. She was afraid that Jaden had guessed that she was not the real Charlotte. The guy wanted to say something else, but changed his mind, adding that next time he had the opportunity, he would like to talk calmly with his sister. He told her goodbye to return carefully, as it was already late, leaving his sister in the laundry room with a shirt in her hands. Eventually, the girl managed to get some pajamas for Eugene. When she entered the room, there was no one inside, when suddenly the commander's voice was heard. Eugene lay wedged tightly between the floor and the bed. Charlotte squatted down and asked why he was hiding there, even though she had told him to hide. The girl smiled and praised him, brushing the dust from his hair, but asked him not to hide under the bed anymore. Eugene looked at Charlotte and smiled, saying that he recognized her steps. The girl jerked her hand away and replied, blushing, that it was great, although she herself began to worry that she had been too familiar. She held out his pajamas to him at arm's length. Eugene asked if he could change his clothes, to which the girl was about to answer that she would go out for a short while, but did not have time. The man had almost taken off his turtleneck, revealing his pumped-up mercenary torso. The girl stopped mid-sentence, so Eugene looked at her questioningly. Charlotte quickly covered her eyes with her hands, indignant that he was changing clothes when she could see everything, but he calmly replied that she could look. The girl blushed so much that not only her cheeks but also her hands turned red. Two sides were fighting within her, one saying that she was not a pervert, that she had a conscience. But the other one wanted to look at his body longer, and Charlotte spread her fingers near her eye. However, Eugene had already changed his clothes. He lay down on the bed, which seemed soft and fluffy to him. As she climbed under the covers, the girl warned that the man needed to leave before the maid arrived. Smiling, Eugene said goodnight to Charlotte. This time, two of us managed to fall asleep, but in the middle of the night, the girl opened her eyes. Her body felt some kind of heaviness, and at the same time she felt something hard and warm. The heroine's eyes widened when she realized that Eugene was sleeping right in front of her, a few centimeters away. They were both lying on the same pillow, or rather Charlotte was sleeping on his arm, and he had his other arm around the girl. It was so close that she could feel the man's breath, and Lindsay couldn't move. But curiosity was stronger than embarrassment. The girl looked closely at such a famous commander and thought that he was not one of those who sleep peacefully. The man was snoring rhythmically, his lips were relaxed. Charlotte thought about how long his eyelashes were. She wondered if she could touch them a little, and her finger automatically reached out to him. Eugene removed his hand from the pillow and hugged the girl, sharply pulling her towards him. Through her sleep, the heroine twitched from fright. And all night, no matter which way Lindsay turned, the man, like a little dog, turned after her. At that moment, he turned over so hard that he almost crushed the girl with himself. Charlotte tried to push him off, but he was too heavy. In the morning, Eugene sat up in bed and asked Charlotte if she had slept well. The girl answered a little angrily. "Couldn't you tell?" He asked why she suddenly appeared there. He noticed that Lindsay looked unwell and asked if she was feeling unwell. The heroine clenched her fists in anger, but she couldn't respond, because it wasn't the man's fault that he was so restless in his sleep, and besides, she could admire his face all night. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. The maid asked my lady to wake up quickly, otherwise she would be late for dinner. Charlotte quickly got out of bed and began to pick up Eugene's things. She told him to come back quickly. This wonderful man came out onto the balcony, holding his things in his hands, and thanked the girl for everything, adding that they would see each other. He leaned his palm on the balcony railing and jumped over it with one deft movement. The heroine watched him run across the entire yard in his pajamas and thought that the curse should be lifted today, and they would most likely have no reason to see each other. She smiled, resting her hand on her cheek, thinking that it would be nice if they accidentally bumped into each other. At dinner, the girl was scolded for sleeping so long, even though the maid had woken her up. Marchioness Lindsay, her mother, asked indignantly how a child like Charlotte could be so lazy, and her father remarked that his daughter looked unwell, as if she had not slept the night before. Turning pale, the girl admitted that this was partly true. She had slept less than 2 hours. The Marquise was unhappy with her daughter, because if she walked around like that, what would they think of her and her mother? But the Marquise took Charlotte's side and asked her to stop the reproaches. Without saying a word, the heroine thought that Charlotte's mother had a huge inferiority complex due to her humble origins, so it was only natural that she considered her daughter a burden. Jaden joined the conversation. He agreed with his father's position that it was time to stop, especially since his sister had been behaving decently lately. The woman, as if forgetting this fact, laughed. It was rather strange to hear something like this from her son, so the Marquise softened. Charlotte didn't understand why her brother was acting like this lately, because for 6 months after this body had taken over her, they hadn't even really talked. According to the author of the novel, Jaden and Charlotte had a bad relationship. Jaden is the son of the late first Marchioness, and Charlotte is the child brought into the world by his new commoner mother. Not only had his older half-sister gone from being a commoner to being a marquise, but her behavior was also appalling, and naturally, young Jaden was disgusted. When she grew up, all she did was create problems, and she had a bad character. She disgraced the honor of the family, so in his place the heroine would also have hated Charlotte. The girl felt a little relieved to realize that she wasn't even part of their family, but she didn't know if she could continue pretending to be Lindsay here. The Marquis coughed and turned to Charlotte. He said that she had really been behaving well lately, so why not go to a tea party for a change of scenery? The girl was surprised by such an offer, and it turned out that she had been receiving invitations lately. The Marquis asked the chief valet to bring them, and 2 boxes of envelopes spilled out onto the table. The heroine was speechless. She even scolded herself a little because, according to the plot, she should be a villain, so why is she so popular? As soon as her mother started talking about her daughter finding herself a husband, the valet approached my lady with a basket of flowers. These flowers arrived to Charlotte with a note inside. The girl was surprised and took the note to see who the flowers were from. The note said it was for the beautiful, flower-like Charlotte from Kiriel. The heroine even tensed up, because why would Kiriel send her anything? The Marquise asked if she meant the daughter of that very archmage who, according to rumors, flirts with all the noble ladies. What can we say about Charlotte, since Kiriel is one of the second male main characters in the novel? Is the reason he got involved with her really a curse? She reached out to the letter to make sure. Of all the envelopes, she chose the dark one. If we are talking about a tea party, then this letter should be the invitation. Charlotte picked up the envelope and declared that she would go to the party. After a moment of silence, the parents asked if Charlotte had a companion. The envelope stated that only couples were allowed to attend the tea party. The heroine smiled awkwardly, because with Charlotte's disastrous reputation in society, she definitely had no one. The girl was thinking whose name to say when she suddenly noticed her brother's gaze. Jaden said that it was not necessary to bring a lover or a fiancé if we were talking about a companion. The red-haired youth said that he would be his sister's companion and would go with her. The Marquise decided that Jaden was ill, otherwise how could she explain the fact that he began to perceive his older sister, but Charlotte decided to refuse this offer because it was suspicious. Jaden stabbed the knife into the steak, causing blood to spurt out. He asked, as if threateningly, if Charlotte was going to go there with the guy who sent her a basket of flowers. The girl smiled and replied that no, of course not. The Marquise was delighted and said that it would be great if Jaden went with Charlotte, and his father even shed a tear. The heroine had no other choice, so she was forced to agree. The estate of the Marquis Masella was so huge that the carriage that drove up to it looked like a needle in a haystack. Jaden offered his hand to his sister as she stepped out of the carriage, their outfits matching the couple theme, both wearing a deep lilac color. The nobles who saw them admired the young Lindsay. The ladies were somewhat perplexed, because they heard that Jaden and Charlotte do not even communicate. They giggled, thinking that the older sister was trying to persuade the young man to go with her. Kiriel noticed the guests, and his gaze fell on the charming Charlotte. A smirk appeared on the guy's lips. The tea party hostess welcomed Mrs. Lindsay and Jaden Lindsay. However, she completely ignored Charlotte's presence, her gaze focused only on her brother. However, the heroine was glad that the hostess did not harbor any malice towards her, and she thanked her for the invitation. Kirill came down the stairs and approached Charlotte, saying that he would like to present her with a bouquet that would complement her captivating appearance. Lindsay was pleasantly surprised because the bouquet was from a third minor character. The girl said that the flowers were beautiful, and Jaden glanced at her. The boy thanked my lady for receiving him. He wanted to know her name. Kirill called Charlotte's name beautiful and introduced himself as a mage of the Imperial Palace. Lindsay smiled sweetly at him, because, as expected, Kirill was simply irresistible, and his silver hair was already an unshakable sign of mage characters. Suddenly, Charlotte noticed that someone was not just emitting a malicious aura, but was almost becoming that dark clot themselves. The tea party host bit her handkerchief in anger as she watched Kirill's interaction with Charlotte. There is only one reason why the heroine chose this place from countless invitations to tea parties. In the original story, the hostess of this tea party, Evelyn Mosella, is madly in love with Kirill. So the chances that she would invite him to this event were 100%. Charlotte thought that if Kirill was cursed like Eugene and Renard, he would give some kind of signal. But first, the heroine needed to secure her own life here. She just needed to get through this tea ceremony, so she turned sharply and ran in the opposite direction, wanting the others to enjoy their time. Charlotte sat down on the bench and crossed her legs elegantly. She exhaled, enjoying the pleasant light breeze. Jaden, leaning on the back of the bench, asked why his sister had been sitting there for so long. Didn't she go talk to her friends? Charlotte looked at the guy with a question mark and replied that she didn't have any girlfriends. Jaden apologized and Charlotte said it was okay and he should go and enjoy his tea, but the guy was out. He added that there was no one here worth meeting. Charlotte raised her hand and looked back, telling her brother that if anyone heard him, but Jaden didn't care. In fact, the girl was pleased that he was now next to her recently. The guy really began to behave more softly. But every time she asks him why this is so, he brushes it off, and now the girl, thinking, noticed that her brother began to seem much more handsome than he had seemed to her before. Charlotte suddenly noticed dark circles under her brother's eyes and asked sharply if he had been tired lately. She pointed out the dark circles under his eyes and explained that she had noticed them while she was sitting so close, but he began to cover his face with his hands and move away, assuring her that he was fine. Charlotte raised her eyebrows and said that if he said so, then it probably was so. The guy blushed for some reason and said that he didn't like to speak badly about others, but the man Charlotte had spoken to recently, the way he looked at her, was unusual. The girl stood up from the bench and replied that this could not be, to which her brother told her that Kirill was a famous heartthrob and that she should be more careful. The heroine was going to take a short walk, and Jaden wanted to accompany her, but the girl had a lot to think about, so she would prefer to be alone. Without taking his eyes off Charlotte, Jaden asked if she really wasn't going to listen to his advice. When she turned around, he told her to do whatever she wanted. Charlotte could tell he was angry, which was more like her brother. Lindsay decided to take action, namely, to meet with Kirill. She didn't know where he could be now, but since this was a romance novel, one method had to work. The cliché of a romantic novel is that to meet the male protagonist, you have to get lost in the garden. Whatever one may say, Kirill appeared and asked the lady why she was alone in such a place. Charlotte smiled and said that they met again, and the boy noticed that she did not look surprised. He seriously asked if my lady had lured him here on purpose. The heroine hesitated because Kirill was right, but it would be problematic if he suspected something. So Charlotte couldn't think of anything better to do than laugh and say that she got lonely quite easily. She pressed her hand to her chest, the corners of her eyebrows raised in sadness. The girl said that he must be aware of her reputation. Charlotte said that no one else spoke to her except the hostess of today's event and him. Kirill wanted to console her, but the girl cried out that she was so lonely, so she usually spent the whole day alone in her room, from morning until night. She thanked him for listening to her complaints and got ready to leave. Kirill paused and thought about her words about spending her days alone in her room. At night there was a light knock on the balcony door. Charlotte shuddered. She knew it was he who had come. The girl walked up to the balcony and opened the doors. Kirill, sitting on the white railing, greeted my lady politely. The girl said he had frightened her, and the man, tucking a plucked flower behind Charlotte's ear, sincerely apologized for visiting her at such a late hour. The heroine smiled and said that she was sure that he had a good reason for it. Kiriel's behavior was normal for her, unlike those two men. Charlotte asked what was the matter, and Kiriel hesitated, but the girl assured him that he could tell her anything. He turned away, saying he was too ashamed to talk about it, and Charlotte almost shouted that it was okay. She took a step towards him, and she put her palm in front of his face, causing Kiriel to blush. Charlotte threatened to take his hand if he didn't tell her right away what the reason was. The heroine was sure that for others this might seem like a rather ridiculous threat, but for Kiriel it would work. The Archmage opened his mouth to give a reason, and Charlotte thought he wouldn't. But he closed his eyes and quickly blurted out, blushing like a lobster, that how could he make bed with a woman he was afraid to touch? This character has a catastrophic fear of women. Kiriel was abandoned by his parents as a baby and raised by his current teacher, the owner of the Magic Tower. Kiriel's teacher insisted on a rather unusual method of teaching, which involved strict separation by gender. Growing up under tutelage, Kiriel was surrounded only by men, and when he left his teacher and went out into the big world, he developed anxiety. He himself understood that he didn't know how to communicate with women. Fortunately, at this time, Kiriel's older friend appeared and taught him from A to Z what to do when meeting a woman. Full of confidence, Kiriel left the tower, but one big problem arose. It turned out that the older comrade was actually a desperate womanizer. Unaware of this, Kiriel diligently practiced the elder's lessons after leaving the tower. Being kind, polite, courteous is good, but Kiriel showed excessive kindness to women he had no intention of dating. It didn't take long for rumors to spread that the court archmage was the worst womanizer in the world. Charlotte was deeply conscious of the fact that he was handsome, talented, and endlessly kind, and that it seemed as if he was asking women to fall in love with him. Lindsay summarized Kiriel's attempts to connect what exactly had happened to him and clarified whether he meant to say that he was cursed. The man confirmed. Charlotte said that this story was, of course, hard to believe, but since he was the Tower Master's apprentice, she couldn't help but believe him. The girl, smiling, said that she believed him, and even though it was a little awkward, she would offer him her bed. The man took her hands and thanked her, calling the girl attentive. Realizing what he had just done, Kiriel jumped back in fear. He went limp and apologized. Charlotte chuckled quietly at the man's expressive reaction to just a touch on her hand. The character she considered a playboy turned out to be pure and innocent. The heroine led the man into her room and pointed to her bed since it was already late. She emphasized that he could spend the night there, but there was something Lindsay wanted to clarify. She asked him if he had any sleep habits, such as rolling over in bed 30 times an hour, or involuntarily reacts to touch in a dream. Kiriel replied that he didn't have such habits, and Charlotte climbed onto the bed and patted the spot next to her. They both lay down on the pillows and lay quite calmly, each on their own side. Kiriel closed his eyes and said that he was not so shameless as to repay kindness with disrespect, and that he did not have the slightest impure thought. Charlotte smiled. The man, just in case, clarified that he had no interest in her in that sense. Never, not until the end of the world. He continued listing until Charlotte sat up and asked him to stop. Kiriel snapped his fingers, and within a second he was dressed in his pajamas. The girl was surprised by this. He looked into her eyes and, smiling, asked her to take care of him. The man added that she could just call him Kiriel, and Charlotte closed her eyes with a heavy sigh. He heard this and asked if something was wrong. Lindsay looked at the ceiling and told Kiriel, who had moved to the very edge of the bed, that she wasn't going to eat him, so he should relax. Charlotte frowned, displeased that he could be so repulsed by the idea of approaching her. She suddenly sat up and in a commanding tone told him to quickly take it and lie down next to her. Kiriel shuddered all over and turned as pale as chalk. The heroine turned away. She began to worry that she had gone too far, although she only wanted to help him relax. Charlotte suddenly said that Kiriel was different from the image she had imagined. She had heard that he got along well with the opposite sex. Looking at the ceiling, the man replied that rumors and reality often differ. He tries to behave in an exemplary manner, since his behavior reflects on the master's authority. Kiriel sincerely did not understand where something went wrong. Charlotte moved closer to the man and told him that there was no need to behave in a certain way. She smiled, adding that he was good just the way he was. Kiriel looked at her with his mouth open when she said that nothing bad would happen if he allowed himself to relax a little. Charlotte grinned. She was being a little cunning at that moment, because according to the plot, these words were said to him by the main character, Isla. Kiriel blushed and gasped quietly. He looked away from the awkwardness and thanked my lady for such warm words. Charlotte wondered what this half-hearted reaction was. According to the plot, he was supposed to be embarrassed. Then she decided it was a realistic reaction to receiving compliments and life advice from someone you've known for less than a day. Surprisingly, Kirill fell asleep quite quickly once they stopped talking, and then Charlotte thought that silver-haired mages were the best thing in this world. In the morning, the girl stretched in bed for the first time in a long time. She managed to sleep well, even though it was her bed. She found that Kirill was not there, but instead there were blue flowers and a dark blue envelope lying on the light sheet. In the note, the man wrote that he was unable to wake Charlotte, so he quietly left her abode. He thanked the girl for her help and promised to present her with a reward. Charlotte thought the reward was interesting. She should still get something from Reynard. The heroine expected a considerable sum from him, and from Kirill she wanted to receive a useful magical tool. As for Eugene, he is simply a cutie, and that is enough. The girl began to comb her hair and decided that it was worth preparing just in case, so that she would not be portrayed as a villain. She would be sad if she couldn't see these three anymore, but Ayla is Ayla, and she is she. A quiet life is much better than the life of the main character. However, some thoughts caused concern in the heroine. Will this world follow the novel as before once she fades into the shadows? Then something terrible will eventually happen to those three too. Charlotte shook off the sad thoughts, reminding herself that she should think about her well-being. Suddenly she heard a light knock on the door and got out of bed to see who was there. Jaden asked his sister with a serious expression if she had slept well last night. The Marchioness was surprised that the two were going for a walk, she asked, since when they got along so well, but Lindsay's father was only glad that brother and sister were getting closer. Jaden admitted that they had recently had a heart-to-heart talk, which made Charlotte turn pale. She had no idea when something like that had ever happened, but the parents were happy they didn't need to wish for anything more if their children had become so close. The same couldn't be said for Charlotte, who, although she was smiling, exuded a dark aura because Jaden was lying. The heroine walked behind her brother, perplexed as to why he would suddenly invite her for a walk. Jaden's preparation for being the heir takes a lot of time, and yet he still found time for her, which couldn't help but be stressful. This was too suspicious, and Charlotte was determined to find out the reason today at any cost, she called her brother, but he said that spring flowers bloom so beautifully. Gently grasping the bud with his fingers, he said that his late mother loved them too. Charlotte felt embarrassed in such an atmosphere she could not start a conversation about what was happening. The guy turned to his sister and asked which of these flowers she liked the most. Lindsay was surprised and replied that it was difficult to decide. They were all so beautiful. Jaden then decided to choose a flower himself and give it to her. Charlotte raised an eyebrow and asked in surprise why he was giving her flowers. Jaden finally tore himself away from the buds and asked if she didn't like flowers, and the girl started waving him off, saying that they were exactly what his mother loved, and that's why they were dear to him. The boy plucked a rose from the bush, calling Charlotte's thoughts strange, because flowers fade and bloom with each season, and if they can bring joy for at least a few days, that's enough for him. Charlotte's face reflected shock. She had already decided that her brother had gone crazy. She cried out his name loudly. The heroine, with a gloomy expression on her face, asked him to stop because he was scaring her. Jaden didn't understand what he had done to scare her, and Charlotte sharply asked why he was acting so strangely. He says he'll send her flowers, invites her to parties. No matter how you look at it, it's suspicious. Jaden looked away and calmly replied that she had changed, and he began to perceive her differently too. The sister exclaimed that this was too much, especially so suddenly. His attitude turned 180 degrees. The heroine placed her hands on her hips and continued that there must be a reason why her brother behaved this way. Accepting such intrusive kindness made Charlotte uncomfortable. Without even looking at the girl, Jaden said that he had no choice if she said so. At first, the guy planned to establish a more friendly relationship. The guy looked the girl in the eyes and admitted that he actually had a favor to ask of Charlotte. Lindsay paused, her lips forming a surprised "oh" as a thought suddenly occurred to her. As soon as night fell, the boy quietly knocked on the door. Charlotte peeked out from behind the door, but he told her to be quiet. After making sure there was no one in the hallway, Jaden entered Charlotte's room, and the girl asked him to tell her what his request was. The guy looked tiredly at his sister and clarified that he was completely sane and healthy. He asked his sister not to think of him as crazy. Charlotte smiled tensely and asked him to simply tell her what it was he wanted to ask for. Jaden got down on one knee in front of her, saying that just one night was enough, asking for permission to sleep in her bed. The heroine did not expect this so much that she almost fell off her feet, losing one slipper. The girl turned away and grabbed her head, not understanding why Jaden was also cursed, because he was not even a minor character. The guy agreed that it sounded absurd, but he kept hearing some voices. Lindsay turned to her brother and calmly asked what the voice was talking about. The guy looked her straight in the eyes and quoted, "The voice called him an impudent puppy, that he's still an annoying character." Charlotte's face suddenly grew hot as her brother added, his voice almost taking pity on him, and she fell, hearing her own words from the comment she wrote under the novel about how she would give him a corner of her bed. Jaden's expression sank, and he said that even he thought it was nonsense, so it was no wonder she didn't believe him. Jaden Lindsay wasn't a villain, but he did give readers a strange sense of discomfort. He did not love his sister, but throughout the novel he often defended Charlotte. Or he tried to hide and downplay her mistakes. In a sense, it was a given, since Charlotte was part of Lindsay's family. Jaden must have been tormented by the conflict between his troubled sister and the family's honor. But that was his problem, and as a result, there were plenty of hateful comments about him. For the readers rooting for Ayla, he was just a bad guy. However, at the end of the novel, when Charlotte was exiled from her family, there was a slight plot twist. It was that Jaden actually had feelings for Isla, but they could never come to light because the guy was Charlotte's brother and her accomplice. Jaden understood this very well, and in the end he wished Ayla happiness for many, many years. The heroine cried in her bed and exclaimed that Jaden was a fool because she couldn't even think about it. The guy admitted that he wanted to somehow win his sister's favor since he had such a strange request. Charlotte, crossing her arms over her chest, turned away. She wanted to say what would have happened if he had said this from the very beginning, but then added that her brother should forget. Everything was always difficult between them. The guy bowed his head and turned to his sister. He looked away from her, embarrassed, saying that although there was a bit of selfishness in it, his words about how he now saw her differently and wanted to improve their relationship were not a lie. These words struck the girl straight in the heart. She flushed and recoiled sharply, not believing that in front of her was the same rude brother she knew. Charlotte clenched her fist and replied that since he had the courage to say so, she would fulfill his request. The heroine jumped onto the bed and called him to her bed. Jaden promised to do everything he could to repay the favor, and Charlotte smiled, patting her pillow. However, the guy was interested in something else, namely, whether that womanizer had contacted her after that incident. Charlotte replied that Kirill had contacted her, and Jaden slowly picked up a silver hair from the pillow. He showed it to his sister, asking whose it might be. Charlotte looked at the hair on her brother's palm and turned pale. The girl's lips trembled. She needed to somehow confuse her brother. So she turned around abruptly and shouted, blushing, what was so special about one gray hair? Jaden was surprised. He was sure that the hair was silver, but the heroine had already blown it off her palm and replied that her brother had imagined it. The boy sat down in the lotus position and deep in thought said that he was wrong, while Charlotte was trembling all over with fear of being caught. Jaden turned to his sister and told her to forget about this womanizer anyway. After all, a real relationship is when they both meet with a blessing, with a clear goal, to start their own family. From these words, Charlotte was even surprised where Jaden got so much old-fashioned thinking from. The boy blushed again and looked away, saying that even if a brother and sister, a grown man and woman, share a bed, it is still not entirely decent. He asked his sister to be patient for just one night. Charlotte softened and wished Jaden good night. When he fell asleep, the girl touched his black eye with her finger and called Jaden so prim. She propped her cheek on her hand and said that while he hesitated, living with her under the same roof, 3 others had already come and gone, but she was pleased that her little brother was worried about her. The affection soon turned to anger. Charlotte told her brother that it was too harsh. He didn't understand what he was talking about, and then Lindsay got mad because he knew she was always waking up late and was getting scolded for it, but Jaden just left her and walked away. The boy, affectionately calling Charlotte's sister, explained that he tried to wake her up, but she didn't get up, so it was her fault. While Charlotte was shouting loudly that she would agree to this and trying to figure out why he had sided with his mother and made things worse, the maids were sitting behind the bushes and whispering that the two were quarreling again. One maid noticed that today everything seemed different. The atmosphere between them was somehow soft, not like before, and Jaden was smiling. A few days later, Charlotte was lying flat on her bed. She felt so calm. No one bothered her the whole time, so there were no headaches from anyone's curses. As long as she just ate, slept, and lay around the house, it was perceived by the family as self-analysis, so everything was perfect. Charlotte turned on her side and frowned, wondering when Renard would pay her what he promised, and Kirill owed her too. Suddenly, white fluffy feathers, which are found on imperial birds, flew into the room and began circling above the bed. And indeed, Reynard's messenger pigeon was sitting on the balcony. The girl approached the bird and carefully unfolded the note hanging on the dove's chest. The paper said that Reynard had urgent business to discuss and would be arriving in the evening, and Charlotte began waving the piece of paper as if hoping that something would fall out of it, since he had promised a reward. The girl cried out that this could not be, and the cry was so loud that the bird suddenly flew into the air and spread its white wings in flight. As soon as the sun set behind the horizon, His Highness appeared, as always impeccable and elegantly dressed. Charlotte bowed to the floor to greet Renard. The man smiled and asked why she was here, outside, since the night air was cool. The girl could not sit inside, knowing that His Highness would honor her with a visit, and Renard, passing into the room, said that he had liked this trait of hers before. Charlotte is honest, but also respectful in a reasonable manner. As soon as they sat down at the table, the heroine asked what the urgent matter was, and His Highness replied that a serious problem had arisen. He steepled his fingers and closed his eyes tiredly, saying that he couldn't sleep again. Charlotte was afraid that he was hearing voices again, which was confirmed. Unfortunately, the curse did not lift, but only died down. The man cursed loudly and slammed his fist on the table. The table, made of strong materials, cracked under the blow of his fist. Charlotte turned pale when His Highness expressed a desire to strangle the one who cursed him. Having come to his senses, the man removed his hand from the table. He apologized for losing his composure, the whole reason being that he had not slept at all. Reynard admitted it was troublesome, but until he lifted this curse, he would need Charlotte's help. The heroine was speechless when His Highness asked to let him sleep in her bed regularly. He added that this was not free. He would pay, His Highness swore, by the honor of the crown and his own. This oath could not fail to amaze, because such promises are unbreakable, and Reynard swore under such circumstances. Charlotte decided not to be modest, and replied that in that case he would give her 10% of the payment in cash, directly into her hands, 30 in government bonds from the imperial treasury, and the last 30 should be deposited into her bank account. The heroine smiled sweetly, adding that bonds with a maturity of at least 5 years were preferable, and that payment should be made through the Kelmir Central Bank. Reynard was silent for a moment, so Charlotte began to wonder if she had been hasty. The man licked his lips with the tip of his tongue. And, looking into Charlotte's eyes, he said that at their last meeting he was too tired to notice that she was unique. The heroine's heart sank. She blushed sharply and covered her mouth with her hands when she saw the man lick his lips. It looked too sexy. Charlotte pulled herself away from her thoughts because she needed to be more serious. If it had been anyone else, she would have written it off as odd, but with Reynard it was crystal clear. His Highness, traumatized by his nanny's betrayal, does this whenever he doesn't trust someone. Seeing that face, Charlotte understood the full extent of the impact, but if Reynard was licking his lips now, did that mean he didn't trust her? The man looked at the heroine and called her by her full name, the girl who once forced her obsessive love on Duke Hicklid. He said that she had caused a huge scandal about 6 months ago and had been in a state of introspection ever since. Therefore, Reynard thought that Charlotte would demand something like revenge on the Duke, but she suddenly asked for money. The girl waved her hands and wanted to explain. But she hesitated. A swarm of thoughts and guesses buzzed in her head about how His Highness suspected her. But as long as Charlotte had the key to freeing herself from the curse, Reynard would not touch her. Images of His Highness sleeping peacefully on Charlotte's bed, with her tied up or locked in a coffin, suddenly appeared before my eyes. The man smirked as he raised his hand and slowly pulled it towards Charlotte. A chill ran through the heroine's body at the sight of Reynard's approaching palm, but a strong hand calmly rested on her shoulder. His Highness said that he was unable to reach an agreement immediately and asked for too much. He apologized. Suddenly there was a knock on the balcony door, and they both fell silent and looked around. The light knock was repeated again. Eugene stood on the balcony and asked Charlotte if she was still asleep. Charlotte almost had a heart attack because right now Reynard was in her room. His Highness asked who it could be at such a late hour and on the balcony too. The girl quickly stood up and began to urge the man to hide. She promised to explain later. Charlotte opened the balcony door and whispered to Eugene what he was doing there. The girl awkwardly admitted that she had some circumstances, and she asked him to leave this time. Charlotte, smiling, said that she would be free tomorrow from 9 o'clock, but the man walked past her, sensing that there was someone else inside. He entered the room without an invitation, placed his hand on the hilt of his sword, and loudly asked who was there. Charlotte turned tensely to the commander. Sweat poured down her face and she hesitated, wondering if she should confess everything honestly. She began to panic, because it would be complete nonsense if she said that they were both cursed by pure chance. She imagined Reynard, knife in hand, preparing to execute her for lying. Charlotte gently grabbed Eugene by the shoulder and quickly blurted out that he was her brother. The man asked again if it was true, and then thought for a moment. He said that Jaden was not bad, because Eugene was sure that he felt the aura of a strong fighter. Charlotte chuckled nervously, silently asking her brother for forgiveness for turning him in. After making sure there was no one suspicious in the room, the man walked up to the railing, announcing that he was leaving. The heroine felt a strong sense of relief, but it frightened her so much that she felt like she had lost several years of her life. Reynard emerged from the closet as the conversation in the room died down. He also asked who Charlotte had spoken to, and she told him about her younger brother. The man thoughtfully rubbed his chin, saying that he almost mistook him for a murderer. The girl decided to change the subject and suggested going to bed. His Highness didn't object. He was surprisingly easy to persuade. Reynard said that he would send a postal bird later regarding the payment. He had already changed into his pajamas, and lying on the bed, said that Charlotte was very important to him, so he wanted to treat her accordingly. The blushing girl exhaled, the thought flashing through her head that if His Highness were to say such things, people would end up completely fooled. As soon as morning came and the birds began to sing their rhapsodies, Reynard woke up and slowly began to change his clothes. Adjusting his jabot tie, he asked Charlotte if she had ever thought about living on her own. The girl woke up feeling rumpled. She yawned for a long time and rubbed her eyes from the tears that had appeared after waking up. Charlotte asked again. As she slowly rose from her bed, Reynard said that he couldn't sneak into Lindsay's marquisate every day, but what if the girl moved out and lived on her own? In fact, Charlotte was thinking about settling in a villa abroad, but she had no plans to go anywhere anytime soon. The heroine approached the decanter and, pouring water into a glass, brought it to her lips, wondering how to remove this curse. Reynard leaned towards Charlotte, saying that this was why he was asking if she would marry him. The girl choked, and water flew out of her mouth in a powerful stream. Wiping the drops from her chin, the heroine glanced fearfully at His Highness, asking what he had just said. The man smiled and, placing his hand on his chest, repeated it again. Charlotte smiled awkwardly and asked what he was talking about. Then Reynard gently asked if she didn't know what marriage was, but the girl wasn't that stupid. The man believed that in the current situation, marriage was the best solution to the problem. If they got married, then, naturally, they would share a bed every night, and to everyone else it would look normal. It sounded quite logical. His Highness suggested getting married quickly, but first he would persuade the Emperor, his father. The girl shuddered and blurted out that proposing marriage so suddenly was somehow awkward. Reynard didn't see the problem. He asked if it was because she was born a commoner. He could sort that out. However, that was not the point. Charlotte lowered her head and quietly asked if His Highness was truly ready to marry her. She rubbed her index fingers shyly, saying that he didn't love her. Reynard froze. He wasn't even thinking about love. The girl's confusion on this issue amused him, and he chuckled. His shoulders shook with laughter. His Highness called Charlotte amazing, but she didn't understand what was funny about it. Wiping away a tear with his finger, the man asked the heroine how many royals, in her opinion, marry for love. Charlotte turned pale. Everything turned out as she suspected. The girl remembered that in the novel, His Highness was the one who kept repeating this. The phrase that love meant nothing to him suited the Crown Prince perfectly. But, as in most romance novels, Reynard is captivated by love and pursues the heroine. However, in this story, his love is not destined to be mutual. After all, the main character is Cedric. Fate, written in the author's hand, decreed that Reinhard Waldeck Leckenberg would be an eternal bachelor. Charlotte didn't agree with this because he was the Crown Prince and he needed an heir. His Highness sat next to the heroine on the bed and told her that if they hurried, the ceremony could be held within 3 months. However, Charlotte replied that this would not happen. She would not marry him. Then Reynard wanted to know the reason. The heroine confirmed that this was due to lack of love. Since she found herself in a romantic fantasy world, she wanted to experience a sweet love story at least once. They sat on the bed and talked calmly. His Highness asked Charlotte if she hadn't said that her feelings for Duke Hicklid had long since faded, to which the girl replied that as soon as she finally let him go, she would begin to look for a new love. She twirled a strand of hair around the tip of her finger, saying that there was nothing she could do if it didn't work. Reynard asked a counter-question. What if they got married and love blossomed later? He touched a strand of her red hair with his palm. He came close to her face and said that no one knows what the future holds for them. These words and the close distance between His Highness and Charlotte made the girl blush. The man pulled a strand of hair towards himself and touched it with his lips, and the heroine felt a flush of heat at the thought that she could fall in love with Reynard. His Highness ran his fingers through the red strand, releasing it. Charlotte thought seriously about this prospect because Reynard's words made sense. The second cliché of romantic novels is falling in love with a partner in a marriage of convenience, but over time, love itself blossoms. She imagined Reynard running to her, telling her that the curse was broken, but he loved her, and she considered him perfect. The girl decides to live happily in luxury from that moment on until the end of her days, but suddenly a rebel runs towards her with a knife with the aim of killing the crown princess. Charlotte trembled, for the question arose unequivocally, could she survive next to the emperor's heir? The girl admitted that it was possible that she might fall in love with His Highness, but marrying based solely on hope was a bad idea. The heroine glanced sideways at the man who had vowed to provide her with generous compensation in the event of a divorce. Charlotte began to hesitate when His Highness mentioned that he would send her abroad without regret, since he too would be embarrassed if his ex-wife remained in the country. As tempting as it sounded, she couldn't risk her life, so she apologized for not being able to accept his offer, and Reynard was amused by her inflexibility. However, the problem was that His Highness was not the only one who was cursed. She has 3 other cute male supporting characters to let into her bed. Reynard accepted my lady's decision, which made Charlotte breathe a sigh of relief. But he immediately suggested that instead of marriage, they announce to everyone that they were dating. Charlotte hesitated. She wanted to say that dating was also a bit too much, but the man was joking. He just wanted to tease her. The heroine awkwardly scratched the back of her head, admitting that she was not the most ambitious aristocrat, and if it had been another lady, she would have grabbed His Highness's hand without a shred of doubt. Getting out of bed, the man said that no words were needed to understand that he was perfect. He grabbed the sword and mantle in his hand, and he said over his shoulder that he was even more perfect than Cedric Hicklid. His Highness wanted confirmation, and Charlotte gasped. She jumped up from her bed and began waving her arms, exclaiming that His Highness was perfection itself, much better than the Duke. He asked the men if it was true, and Charlotte got carried away. She began to quickly say that, having seen His Highness up close, she realized that the Duke was nothing special. He had a terrible face. Reynard expressed hope that this opinion would never change. His Highness extended his hand for a handshake. He suggested that we work well together since we were stuck in the same boat for a long time. Charlotte pressed her hand to her chest, and His Highness asked why she hesitated. After these words, she shook his huge palm with both hands. After Reynard's visit, Charlotte lay motionless on the bed, feeling as if all the life had been sucked out of her. She fell asleep and woke up when it was already night outside. The fatigue was still felt, so the heroine trembled from time to time. In this state, she met Eugene. Charlotte thought that if the curse had returned to him, then the same thing had happened to Kiriel and Jaydan. She clutched her head, calculating which days the secondary characters would come to her to sleep with her. The man said that he had changed his clothes and he looked very cute in these brown checkered pajamas. Charlotte even wanted to pet him. The girl said that he would go to bed with her on one condition. Eugene looked questioningly at Charlotte. She took a strong rope and stretched it in her hands, telling him not to worry, that there was nothing wrong with it. The man didn't seem particularly surprised, but asked about the rope, the whole point being that his sleeping habits were too violent. Charlotte replayed the tape of last night with Eugene in her head and was not going to let it happen again. The girl, blushing, asked the man if she could tie him up. He didn't mind. When the heroine finished with the rope, she felt somehow uneasy. The man pulled the rope and all efforts came undone. He told Charlotte to tie it so that the knot would not come undone. Eugene knelt down in front of the girl and put his clasped wrists forward, asking Charlotte to tie him up. Despite the fact that this request seemed obscene to the heroine, she accomplished her task. The man could barely move. Charlotte thanked him, as it must be inconvenient, and he agreed without any doubt. Eugene turned his gaze to the girl and said that he was indebted to her. The heroine beamed. Because this man was so obedient compared to Reynard, Eugene asked to cover him. Charlotte covered the tied-up man and wished him a peaceful sleep and to make up for lost rest. Just as they were about to go to bed, there was a knock at the door. He quietly knocked on his sister's room, asking if she was there. He asked permission to come in for a minute. Charlotte panicked. She didn't know what to do, because if her brother found out, he would think that she was some kind of depraved predator. The girl asked Eugene to wait. She quietly opened the door, asking what had happened at such an hour, a fire or something. Jaden's face was blank. He said gloomily that he had urgent business and asked to come in. Charlotte asked nervously if it would be possible to say here what exactly had happened. Jaden pressed his palm to the door next to his sister's face. He said that he saw something while he was walking at night. He moved closer to her face and said darkly that he had noticed a black figure creeping along her balcony. The guy apologized for the intrusion and abruptly opened the door. He entered the room. Charlotte turned around in horror. She was already imagining all the possible outcomes of the situation. Jaden walked up to the bed and froze, covering his mouth with his hand in shock. But instead of a tied-up man, the brother found a pillow, well tied with knots, and he asked what it was. Without taking his eyes off the rope, the guy thoughtfully said that he would never have thought that his sister had such a hobby. Charlotte almost cried with shame. She reproached herself for not telling him that he had misunderstood everything. The younger brother turned sharply, bowed to his sister, apologizing for the disturbance, and carefully walked around her. Closing the door, he wished Charlotte good night. The girl was furious. As soon as Jaden shot out of the room, she let out a loud breath, and Eugene immediately said that he was glad he left. Charlotte smiled, agreeing that this was indeed good. When she turned around, she was shocked to see that Eugene was completely free of rope and knots. Charlotte asked how he was able to get out, to which the man replied that the rope came undone when he pulled on it. However, the girl still didn't understand why he had tied the pillow, but there was a logical answer to that. It would be suspicious if the torn rope was simply lying on the bed. Charlotte sat down on the bed and pulled the end of the rope, asking how Eugene made such a strong thing. The man approached the girl from behind and stretched out his arms forward. He began to untie the strong knots, holding his hands on either side of Charlotte. The man tied the pillow because he was afraid of upsetting the girl, because she tried so hard. Eugene gasped as he noticed the rope had broken, and Charlotte was flushed red from the man standing so close to her, her shoulder pressing against his chest. She said she appreciated his concern for her, but the most important thing to Charlotte was that he didn't move. The man gently apologized, and the girl hastened to say that nothing terrible had happened. She patted the pillow next to her, suggesting that he just go to sleep. Eugene happily lay down next to her, pressing his cheek against the soft pillowcase. Charlotte felt as if she were floating. She had another chance to admire the sleeping Eugene. The girl said that she thought about the curse, and since it was not removed, he could come to her once a week. His hand landed softly on the bed next to Charlotte. The man extended his little finger, promising to be sure to thank my lady. He quietly said that he always keeps his promises. Charlotte smiled back and said she would remember, their little fingers intertwined. However, the pleasant things ended for today. At night, the heroine received a foot in the face. Unable to bear it any longer, she rose up in bed and clutched the pillow in furious agony, looking at Eugene sleeping peacefully. A few days later, Jaden came to his sister, asking for a minute of her time. Seeing that the girl was reading the letter, he asked her who it was from. The guy thought all this time that his sister had no friends. Charlotte stood up abruptly from her chair and backed away, hiding the letter behind her back. She replied that it was none of his business. Jaden said he left last time, but he still had a strange feeling, but he was still glad that nothing happened to his sister. Charlotte was embarrassed and said that he worried about her too much. She appreciated his concern, but now was not the best time. The girl was hiding a letter from Kirill behind her back. Jaden mentioned that his sister's probationary period ends tomorrow. Mom passed on a message for Charlotte. She said she would give her another chance, but if her daughter got involved with Duke Hicklet again, she would definitely send Charlotte to a convent. The heroine gave a thumbs up and assured that this would not happen again. The next day, she went to a magical tool shop called the Forest of Illusions. Charlotte thought everything would be fine, but it's not that simple. There she encountered Duke Hicklet, who crossed his arms over his chest and told her, "Well, here she is again." The man thought she had calmed down for a while, but the girl seems to be starting to show her true colors again. Charlotte thought that this was the end, because at this rate she would definitely go to a convent. She reassured herself that even in a tiger's den one could survive if one kept one's cool. She laughed quietly and asked the Duke how he was doing. The man asked sullenly how Charlotte knew he was here and if she had hired someone to follow him again. He didn't trust her at all, and rightfully so, given the original Charlotte Lindsay's past misdeeds. The girl clenched her fist and fell to her knees, publicly saying that she was very sorry. The Duke was taken aback, and the girl said that it was quite natural that he should suspect her, given her past sins. His lordship's eyebrows twitched, and a bead of sweat trickled down his face from such an unexpectedly sincere speech. Charlotte thought that her attempts to ruin his and the young lady's lives were unjustifiable, but the man said that Lindsay was up to something again. The heroine looked up at his lordship with an envelope in her hands, asking him to trust her at least this time, to read the letter of apology. The ladies began to whisper. It was new to them that Charlotte Lindsay got down on her knees and asked for forgiveness. Did she really repent? Hicklid still didn't believe the girl, saying that she repents is very easy. Charlotte looked away. She knew that her sins were not so easily forgiven, and she thought that Cedric was too perceptive. The man suddenly said that if she had proof that she had not been following him, then he would believe her. Only the manager of this magical tools shop knew that the Duke would be coming today, so his lordship asked for convincing evidence. The girl fell silent. She did not know how to prove her innocence. Suddenly an idea came to her mind. She handed his lordship a letter. The Duke glanced sideways at the handwriting with its absurd apologies and asked if it wasn't her letter. A heavy aura began to emanate from Hicklid. Charlotte gasped and turned away, looking for another letter. Having found it, she handed it to the Duke, saying that she had also signed up in advance and came after contacting him. The man chuckled when he read that Lady Charlotte had made an appointment with the shopkeeper yesterday. Even the most powerful people couldn't get an appointment with that person the next day. Hicklid added that if she was going to lie, then she should make it more believable anyone could write such a letter. He asked who sent it. When suddenly a man's voice was heard from behind, he said that it was his letter. A man with a hood on his head asked the Duke almost right over his ear what business he had with his guest. Hicklid tensed up, turned towards the voice, and asked the man who he was. The man introduced himself as the deputy manager of the Fantasy Forest. However, this was the first time Hicklid had heard of such a position in this place. A man in a robe approached Charlotte and offered her his hand, asking the lady to stand up. The girl did not immediately see who approached her until the man raised his head and put his finger to his lips, thereby asking her to be quieter. Charlotte smiled and thanked the deputy manager. She took a step forward, but her legs buckled from the numbness. Charlotte leaned forward, but Kirill didn't let her fall. He supported the girl by the shoulders. The man asked the Duke how he allowed the lady to kneel for so long. He had no chivalry. Hicklid exhaled and told his deputy not to meddle in matters that were none of his business, but to mind his own business. Kirill bowed to Charlotte. He formally welcomed her to the magic tool shop, and he politely said that the owner, unfortunately, was not there at the moment, so could she please wait a little in the VIP room. Charlotte looked at Kirill carefully. Hicklid chuckled at the fact that the deputy manager was offering this to her, even though he had signed up with the owner first. Kirill firmly said that the Duke couldn't do it now, because she was his personal guest. The Duke replied with a grin that he could not give details, but he was investigating. The man demanded a meeting with the owner. Kirill said that if he doesn't have a warrant to investigate, then they are not obligated to honor his request in the first place. The Duke asked the deputy's name, and he asked him to show his face and state his name. The hooded man replied that he was not obligated to do so, but mentioned that he was a tower mage, not bound by social rules. Kirill turned to escort Charlotte Lindsay to the VIP room, leaving the Duke shaking with anger behind. When they left the hall, the girl began to worry whether everything would be okay. Kirill apologized for the wait. When he took off his hood, he was completely red. His tongue was slurred from the fact that he accidentally touched Charlotte's body and only now realized. 5 minutes had already passed, but the man was silent. Charlotte asked if he had calmed down and if they could talk. Kirill smiled a beaming smile, saying that they were talking about the reward he promised her for helping her. The girl noticed that he looked nervous. She assumed that he should have gotten used to it by now, but Kirill found it difficult to do so. But this man was unique. He spoke so coldly to Cedric, to which Kirill replied that Hicklid left him with the impression of being a very annoying person. Suddenly, the man raised his hands up, involuntarily throwing the cup into the air. He remembered that Charlotte liked this man. Seeing the cup, Kirill used magic to prevent the tea from spilling. He asked Charlotte if she had given up on her quest to get love from Hicklid. Charlotte, amazed at how the tea hung in the air, replied that yes, she was on her knees because she was apologizing for a mistake from the past. Kirill felt calmer, took the cup in his hands and said that Charlotte was too good for someone like the Duke. The heroine thought that the reason why Kirill, usually awkward with women, was so friendly towards her was because of the curse. The girl asked him not to praise her so much, but the man really thought so. He said that his position as deputy was not advertised, but Charlotte immediately guessed his connection with this place. The heroine replied that it was just luck, although in fact she was just reading a novel. The man decided to get straight to the point in the letter. Charlotte mentioned that she would like to receive one of his inventions as a reward. Lindsay, smiling awkwardly, said that was why she came, although it was just an excuse. Kirill rose from the sofa and asked the girl to follow him. He led her to the room where all his magical inventions were kept. The man did not rush Charlotte with a choice. They weren't all for sale, but if there was anything my lady wanted, Kirill would be happy to give it to her. Charlotte looked around curiously. He gave her his fan, which, if she fanned herself with it at least once in the heat, would cool Charlotte down for about 10 minutes. The next item was an insect repellent. The magician talked about each item the girl was interested in. Charlotte took out a receipt asking her to buy something here, in addition to what Kirill would give as a reward. The man laughed and admitted that it would be difficult since these magical items were practically priceless. Then Lindsay decided to take the special invention another time, but today she only wanted to get the magical item she needed. Kirill felt sad that his inventions did not attract Charlotte, but the girl insisted that she simply was not impressed by them. They were truly wonderful. Now there was something that she simply needed. From these words, the man's sadness was replaced by interest. After a while, the magician entered the room with the box. He asked Charlotte if something like this would definitely work, but the heroine was beaming with anticipation. She eagerly opened the lid of the box to get what she so desperately needed. Inside was a hunting rope, a magical tool used to tie up wild animals. It was incredibly strong, and Charlotte could already imagine herself using it to subdue Eugene. Kirill steepled his fingers and, as if afraid, said that he actually had one more request. Charlotte was surprised, but in fact the reason she approached this man was different. Kirill looked away, embarrassed. He knew it was terribly shameless of him, but he still asked if he could sleep in her bed again. The heroine was here because Kirill's curse had not yet been lifted. She replied that he could come to her room tonight. The man asked if she was serious, and Charlotte smiled. A tear froze on Kirill's lower eyelashes. He was incredibly grateful. The Marquis heard that his daughter had met with Duke Hicklid today and had knelt down to apologize, and Jaden even glanced back at his sister. The family wanted to know if it was true, and Charlotte had no choice but to confirm the rumors. The Marquise was amazed, because with her pride, her daughter would not tolerate humiliation. Her father apologized for never believing Charlotte, and the heroine, turning pale, thanked them for their faith. The mother suggested leaving everything behind, since Charlotte had apologized to the Duke, and the father supported her. He also said that it was time for her to return to high society, which made the heroine shudder. The Marquise asked why her daughter was so surprised, since her seclusion was over and she officially apologized. Moreover, Lindsay's father arranged a matchmaking for her, since his daughter had already reached marriageable age. As soon as the girl entered her room and closed the door behind her, the pillow flew up and hit the bed. Charlotte bit her and screamed that she hated this high society. She just wanted to stay at home. The girl sat upset, hugging a pillow. She was sad that her reputation was ruined and that she had recently been doused with champagne. The heroine grabbed her hair and began screaming for them to leave her alone, not even to come near her from these screams. The hand at the door shook and dropped the bouquet. Kirill turned pale and said that he could never have imagined that she hated him so much. The man hid his eyes behind his sleeve and froze. He considered himself too ignorant, for what kind of man would suddenly ask a lady to let him sleep in her bed? Charlotte exclaimed that she was not upset because of him, but that there were people in society who tormented her. They had already gone to bed on different sides and were discussing it, and the heroine asked if the man didn't have his own problems. Kirill replied that it was still a fear of women, and although he wasn't sure, he had recently felt someone's gaze on him. Charlotte thought she had become closer to him, but even today he tried to avoid her. It must be difficult for him in everyday life too. Charlotte wondered what Isla would say. Then she pulled herself up short, because why did she need other people's thoughts? Last time it only made everything more complicated. This time Charlotte was going to have it her way. She rose from the bed and turned around sharply. For some reason, Kirill also reached out to her at that moment, and their gazes met a couple of centimeters apart. The man's face flushed. Charlotte froze. She herself could not utter a word. He was too close. With a trembling hand, Kirill showed the girl the feather that was stuck to her back. The man jumped out of bed and ran, but not far. He tripped over the blanket and fell to the floor with a thud. Charlotte asked if he was okay. They decided to go to bed, but things were bad. 30 minutes passed and none of them could fall asleep. Kirill sat up and scratched the back of his head awkwardly, assuming that the curse had intensified, although he would then have seen illusions, but Charlotte said that he was worried. The man replied that he was fine, but he was worried that my lady could not sleep. This concern for her surprised Charlotte, because Kirill probably hadn't slept for several days and was terribly tired himself. The man added that he had prepared something just in case. He pulled out a coin from somewhere tied to a thread. The heroine moved closer with curiosity. It was a magical device that helps one fall asleep. Kirill began to swing the coin, saying that if he concentrated on it, before Charlotte had time to realize it, sleep would take hold of her. The man's words became slower. His eyelids relaxed. The device worked on him in a second. He fell into a deep sleep, falling onto the girl's lap. Charlotte was indignant, because what good was this thing if he was the one falling asleep instead of her? Kirill's eyes were closed. He was snoring peacefully without making any sounds. A light blush adorned his cheeks. Charlotte smiled, thinking that maybe it was for the best. She ran her hand down his back and wished him good night. The heroine was glad that he could finally rest. More precisely, she should be happy, but one problem arose. Charlotte was slowly losing feeling in her legs from the weight of Kirill's head. Even her hands were shaking. She didn't know what to do, because if she moved now, the man would wake up, but she couldn't sit like this all night. The girl came up with the idea of putting a pillow under his head instead of her legs, and she managed to get out. She was about to get out of bed when suddenly she felt a pain in her leg. Charlotte was pulled toward the floor, and Kirill's hand jerked after her. When she opened her eyes, she was surprised that the fall had not been painful. A soft, concerned voice asked if she was okay. Kirill hovered over Charlotte, holding the back of her head with his hand, hoping she wasn't hurt. At such moments, the man seemed to completely forget about his fear. He looked Charlotte straight in the eyes, hoping to hear an answer. The heroine gasped and replied that no, she was fine. When the realization dawned on the man, he was so embarrassed that he quickly changed his clothes and headed to the balcony, saying that he would visit Charlotte in 10 days. As he left, Kirill said that he would send a letter under the name of the Forest of Fantasy store before that time to notify her. The man handed my lady a purple rose. They said goodbye to each other with smiles on their faces. Charlotte lay back down on the bed, enjoying the scent of the flower. Just when she decided that she would lie around all day, there was a knock at the door. She stood on the floor, put on her slippers and headed towards the door, thinking it was Jaden. But her mother was waiting for her outside the door. She asked her daughter with a serious look if she had slept well. The Marquise noticed the flower on her daughter and told her not to tell her that this flirting wizard had sent another basket. The woman came to tell Charlotte the date of her blind date, which the heroine had completely forgotten about. Seeing her daughter's shock, the Marquise asked what was the matter. Did she really not want to? And Charlotte looked away. The woman said that Cedrina's heir is famous for being handsome, and Charlotte would probably like him. Having heard that he was handsome, the girl enthusiastically agreed to a date. Only then she didn't know what she would actually have to face. The man talked so much about his family that he couldn't stop talking, so much so that Charlotte didn't even notice where she was. He said that although Lindsay was of humble origin, she had received a noble upbringing, so she certainly knew how to appreciate beauty. When he started laughing, the girl covered her face with her hand, thinking that she had become desensitized to beauty because she had seen so many handsome guys. The way this man bragged while cleverly putting Charlotte down was irritating. Noticing that the girl began to look around, he asked Lady Lindsay if she was listening to him. Charlotte's gaze fell on the table where Eugene was sitting. He was stabbing a piece of cake with a fork, oblivious to everything around him. Charlotte turned away from the man openly, wondering what Eugene was doing in the pastry shop. The commander, who frightened everyone with his aura and numerous victories, devoured the sweets with admiration. Charlotte was touched by this. She felt how her eyes and ears, which had died from this idiot behind her, were coming back to life. Suddenly she wondered if this was really that cliché. The third rule of romance novels is that the heroine goes on a blind date, and then the protagonist intervenes. She imagined Eugene declaring that Charlotte was his and no man dare touch her. The heroine was so lost in her dreams that she spilled tea on the table. Her companion asked if she was feeling unwell. Charlotte decided to wait for Eugene to intervene, but after 30 minutes nothing happened and the idiot continued to chatter. Her ears drooping and her body shaking with stress, she glanced back to see how Eugene was doing, but he was ordering more desserts. The companion suddenly asked Charlotte whether the Marquis of Lindsay had ever mentioned her future inheritance. Seeing the confusion, the man said that if the entire inheritance went to her brother, and then he expelled her and her mother, wouldn't that be a problem? Charlotte tensed up and replied that Jaden would never do that. Then the man started a new tirade, saying that if he were in Jaden's place, he would never have recognized a low-born commoner. Charlotte couldn't stand it any longer. She rose from the table and, looking piercingly at her companion, said that she had had enough. She was not going to stay any longer with someone who dared to insult her family. The man stood up for my lady. He grabbed her hand, asking her to stop, justifying himself by saying that he was saying this only out of concern for her and the Marquise. This time the heroine answered rudely, asking what kind of concern could there be? Wasn't he chasing after their family's fortune? Charlotte's mother was always ostracized for being a commoner, and because Charlotte Lindsay was constantly getting into trouble, people pointed fingers at her even more. But even despite this, she did not give up. The Marquise was kind enough to personally arrange this blind date. It's okay if people look down on Charlotte for her past, but her mother clearly doesn't deserve it, and the girl demanded that she be let go. The man was not about to let her go when suddenly someone's strong hand grabbed Charlotte's companion by the wrist. Eugene approached them and told the man that the girl didn't like it. The commander glanced at him and told him to let go of his hand. Charlotte knew Eugene would intervene, but she never expected it now. Cedrin told the man not to interfere in their affairs, then Eugene pressed on his wrist. Charlotte's companion doubled over in pain and had to let go of the girl, and Eugene asked her if everything was okay. Cedrin grabbed a fork from the table and shouted, "How dare this bastard touch him!" He gave the dessert tower a sharp nudge with his elbow. All the sweets that Eugene ordered fell on the floor. The aura around the commander thickened, and politeness was replaced by irritation. He grabbed the young brat by the collar and lifted him off the ground, saying that he was dead. Charlotte was afraid for her companion. The waiters heard the noise from the first floor and ran into the hall. Charlotte looked back at them, then at Eugene, and told him that they had to run quickly. The man was upset about the desserts, but his eyes lit up when Lindsay shouted that she would buy him as many as he wanted later. Eugene walked up to Charlotte and picked her up in his arms, asking her to hold on tight. The cafe staff discovered that one of the patrons had lost consciousness, and they were about to follow the culprit, but Eugene's feet were already on the balcony. He quickly jumped down with Charlotte in his arms. The girl screamed and looked at the ground with fear, frozen in tears. Eugene, looking at the balcony, said that judging by their faces, they wouldn't be able to catch up with them. The man placed his hand on Charlotte's shoulder, asking if she could handle it on her own. The girl confidently answered, "Of course." She rushed away from the cafe, shouting to Eugene that they would meet later. Her face was red from the fact that this man was carrying her like a princess. She seemed to be going crazy. Her heart could not calm down. Thus ended Charlotte's very first arranged date. When my father heard what had happened, he exploded with anger, and my mother promised that she would never force Charlotte to go on such dates again. Her parents consoled her. The Marquis was not going to leave it like that. But Charlotte secretly grinned, because now she was finally free. Now that she could do whatever she wanted, the first thing she did was change her clothes and go to the kitchen. She decided to bake the cookies herself to give to Eugene. There was a lot of enthusiasm until the results were seen. Charlotte had completely forgotten that there were no electric ovens in this romantic fantasy world. The girl quickly threw off her apron and cap and ran out of the kitchen. She knew another way. As Eugene approached Lindsay's estate that night, he thought about how fluffy Charlotte was and how nice she smelled. And today he will also try some cookies. The man looked at the full moon and dreamed that it was the most delicious cookie. When Eugene jumped onto the balcony, the girl was fiddling with the last gifts. She was glad of his arrival. Seeing a pile of boxes near the door to the room, he froze and blushed. Unsure, the man asked if this was all for him, but Charlotte had promised to buy him sweets. She pointed to the macaroni, cake, and chocolate, but Eugene smelled a strange odor. Eugene turned his head towards the aroma. It smelled like burning. He asked Charlotte what was in that box at the back. The girl didn't immediately think of what to answer, so Eugene simply walked up to the source of the smell. He opened the box containing the burnt cookies and asked if these were his too. The girl admitted that she actually baked them for him, but they turned out too burnt. Eugene said he would eat them. He wasn't afraid if the cookies didn't taste good, and immediately after these words he took a bite. Wiping the crumbs from his lips with his finger, he looked at Charlotte and said that she had prepared this for him. Charlotte seemed about to melt. The man suddenly stuck out his tongue, admitting that the cookies tasted terrible, but he was still going to finish them. The heroine said that he could take the rest tomorrow. Since it was already late and time to go to bed, Eugene thanked her. The girl couldn't help but use the hunting rope. She tied up Eugene, who asked where Charlotte got such a strong rope. The girl smiled, because now with this rope she would be able to sleep soundly next to Eugene. The man came closer to her face and called the girl by name. The heroine was so embarrassed that she suddenly recoiled. He just wanted to ask her to hold on tightly to the knot, just in case the rope would come undone. Eugene lay on his side and Charlotte lay behind him. She put her arm around him to hold the knot and, taking it, asked if that was what he meant. This pose embarrassed her very much. The girl's face was almost pressed against the man's shoulder. She wanted to ask him if he was okay, but Eugene had already fallen asleep. Charlotte closed her eyes, thinking that she was the only one here who was nervous, so she should just go to sleep. In the morning, she screamed so loudly that a bird flying over the estate flinched from the sharp sound. The girl fell out of bed face down on the floor, and Eugene sat on top of her, asking if she was okay. Charlotte mentally cursed the rope for its uselessness as the man helped her up, when suddenly the maid knocked on the door. It was time to get up. Eugene quickly got ready and jumped off the balcony, running across Lindsay's yard so that no one would notice him. Memories of the night flashed before his eyes, or to be more precise, how he woke up in the middle. The man looked at Charlotte's hand holding the knot, and her palm seemed so tiny to him. He then wondered if it was possible to hold the knot with such a small hand. Charlotte slept with her mouth open, her warm breath fanning Eugene's neck. A slight blush appeared on his cheeks, and the girl's breath was ticklish. The man wanted to move forward a little, but as soon as he did, the rope suddenly tightened and broke. He ran, thinking how soft Lindsay was and how delicious she smelled. His ears turned red thinking about her, how small and ticklish she was. He wished the week would go by faster. At breakfast, the Marquise asked her daughter if she hadn't slept enough again. Charlotte, clutching her side with one hand and pushing her chair back with the other, replied that there was a little. The Marchioness was worried that her daughter was very upset about the matchmaking incident, but Charlotte said that it was all in the past. The woman mentioned that her daughter's birthday was just around the corner, and she also mentioned a gift. Charlotte began to wonder what it was, and there were a lot of options, from pocket money to a vacation. But the Marquise burst into these dreams with the words that they had decided to arrange a grand banquet for her on the occasion of her birthday. Charlotte jumped up from her chair. She seemed indignant, but the woman told her not to think of refusing. It was Jaden's idea, who blushed at his mother's mention. He was also worried about his sister. The girl bent over from pain in her lower back, muttering, "So that's what he meant." Charlotte returned to reality already in bed. She looked tiredly somewhere through. Jaden told her that if she didn't want to, she could have said so right away, to which Charlotte asked him to shut his mouth. She sighed heavily, saying that she could already imagine people whispering behind her back and provoking her into quarrels. The girl stretched, adding that she didn't want to run into Isla and Cedric. Jaden was amazed that his sister cared about what others thought. Hadn't she always lived her life the way she thought was right, despite the gossip? He sat up and sat next to his sister, saying that this was not like her at all, and the heroine tensed up. She had relaxed so much with Jaden that she stopped playing the role of Charlotte. The girl smiled and agreed with her brother that she was behaving rather unusually. Jaden looked at his sister and asked if she remembered what she had told him on the training ground 10 years ago. Of course, the heroine couldn't know this. She decided to clarify when exactly it happened. Jaden recalled that she had approached him that day while he was training, but nothing like that had happened again, and the girl struggled to remember. The guy told her to tense up and think. That phrase was just in her repertoire. A flushed Charlotte gave in and shouted that she didn't know, and that Jaden should leave her alone. The girl turned to her brother when he suddenly fell silent, but he, surprisingly, smiled and agreed that she didn't remember. Then she yelled at him just like now, that he was giving up just because the training was going badly. How could he master the sword? Jaden said that she made him feel so hurt and unfair that it made him train harder out of spite. He exhaled, adding that it was not surprising that she did not remember, since for her it was probably a trivial matter, although for him it was a memorable event. Jaden questioned her to remind her of what exactly Charlotte had told him that day. She smiled and extended her hand to him, saying that being afraid of breaking something was stupid. Therefore, Charlotte does not need to be afraid of anything in vain. After all, their family will always stand behind her. The girl blushed and quietly asked if Jaden was trying to cheer her up, but he didn't answer the question and only said goodnight. Charlotte tugged at her brother's hand, but he didn't respond. and she was indignant because his sister was about to get emotional, and Jaden couldn't wait 5 minutes. The guy lay with his eyes closed. His desire to be acknowledged by his sister in his youth was not purely out of malice or stubbornness. As soon as Charlotte helped Jaden up, she abruptly pulled her hand away from him. The boy hoped that this girl would at least once look in his direction. He wondered if they could be good brother and sister. Jaden was sure his sister thought the same. But now Charlotte was hugging him from behind and quietly calling him heartless, and the boy could never have imagined that his childhood dream would come true like this. The next day, the heroine went shopping with the night bodyguard, Calix, who was assigned to Charlotte in place of the fired one. She trudged along, sighing heavily. The girl hated shopping, but she had no choice for some reason. The knight asked if they were going to buy a dress for her birthday. At the boutique, she was met by an unfamiliar noble lady who asked from the doorway how Charlotte Lindsay dared to come to this place. The heroine frowned, trying to understand who was in front of her. She had so many enemies that she couldn't even remember. The girl huffed and puffed, asking if Charlotte really wanted to cause trouble again. She told Lindsay not to pretend. Calix covered Charlotte with his body and asked the lady if she was the one asking for trouble here. He asked her to solve everything with words. The heroine looked at the stranger's cold gaze. She could not remember her, but since this lady spoke to her condescendingly, her family must be of high status. Charlotte decided to try to simply ignore her. She turned in the other direction, asking the knight what kind of dress was suitable for the banquet. The point-blank tactic only angered the lady more, and she walked quickly towards Charlotte. When the heroine looked back, she saw a raised palm ready to strike in front of her. Calix stood in front of Charlotte and received a slap in the face. Charlotte was excited because this blow belonged to her. The knight told my lady that it was enough. The heroine approached him and asked him with concern how he was, but compared to training, this was a mere trifle for the man. Charlotte opened her fan. She understood that if she let the girl get away with this, it would cast a shadow on the name of the Marquis of Lindsay's family. She glanced sharply at the lady, saying that she was sure she had something to say. Charlotte demanded an apology from her bodyguard. She approached the girl, explaining that if she had done something wrong, she was obliged to apologize. Even though Sir Calix was just a knight and she was from a noble family, that was no reason to insult him. The lady was outraged and asked what right Charlotte had to utter such righteous nonsense, but she was interrupted by a soft, feminine tone. The pink-haired person recognized a familiar face behind Charlotte's fan. Isla greeted Lady Lindsay. They hadn't seen each other for a long time. The indignant lady beamed when she saw Ayla, and Charlotte turned pale, covering her surprise with her fan. The heroine did not expect to see her here. She smiled tensely, thinking to herself, what a thing of all the possible people to meet here, her. Isla quietly asked Jane what had happened to Lady Lindsay. When the pink-haired person called this lady by name, Charlotte heard. Suddenly, she remembered that her name was Jane Courtman, a rather important secondary character in the novella. She is Isla's closest friend. Isla turned to Charlotte and said that her friend had been a little rude. The girl apologized on her behalf, although Jane did not agree with this. The heroine slammed her fan shut and replied that it was not she who deserved an apology, but her bodyguard, who had been slapped. Jane started to huff and puff again. Did Charlotte really want her to apologize? The girl asked why Lindsay was making her out to be the one to blame. It was unfair, because Charlotte was the one to blame. Jane pointed at Lady Lindsay not only with her finger, but also with a sharp question about whether she had forgotten how she had treated Isla. This girl was chattering that she heard that Charlotte even knelt before the Duke, and if she wanted an apology, let her kneel before Isla. Charlotte closed her eyes. She decided to do as Jane wanted. The girl asked for forgiveness, which caused Courtman to suddenly fall silent. Charlotte admitted that she had made many unforgivable mistakes towards Isla over the years. She understood perfectly well that no words could wash away her sins, but she still asked for forgiveness. And if kneeling can ease Miss Isla's heart, she's willing. Charlotte was stopped by a hand on her shoulder. Ayla quickly walked up to Lady Lindsay and asked her to stop. She smiled and said that she accepted Charlotte's apology, and that was enough. The heroine did not expect such a quick forgiveness from Lady Bean. Isla pointed at Jane, hoping Charlotte would forgive her friend's rudeness. Charlotte agreed only if she apologized to Sir Calix, but the man himself felt awkward and said that the lady should not go that far. Jane clutched her dress with both hands, shaking with disbelief at the situation. But Isla came up to her and hugged her, saying that she knew she was a good person and that she also understood that Jane's desire to protect her was strong. The most important thing is that Lady Bean knows that her friend is one of those who is able to admit her mistakes and apologize. Jane, blushing, agreed with Isla. She, guiltily lowering her gaze, asked Sir Calix for forgiveness for having crossed the line. The knight smiled. He accepted her apology. Charlotte watched them and thought that this was what was expected from the main character. Her words have a strange power to touch and convince. Since the heroine is connected with secondary male characters, she will have to constantly encounter Ayla. Charlotte turned to Lady Courtman, and after apologizing for the rudeness she had shown to her earlier, the heroine chose to act wiser, even if it seemed unfair. Charlotte admitted that out of jealousy for Miss Isla, she had slandered Jane. Corman was stupefied. It was unusual to see Miss Lindsay like this. The girl also added that she could not continue to spoil the pleasant shopping of the two ladies, so she invited Sir Calix to return. Isla asked Charlotte to stay a moment. In fact, Duke Hicklid warned her to be careful around Lindsay. But she wanted to get to know Charlotte better, so she asked if the lady could send her an invitation to the birthday banquet as well. The heroine tensed up, because if Isla came, then Cedric would show up too. The girl prayed that they would leave her alone. Isla's eyes became pitiful. Tears appeared on her eyelashes. The girl asked if she was really asking for too much. Charlotte came home completely exhausted. In the end, she didn't even buy herself a dress and promised to send an invitation to Isla. The girl collapsed face down on the bed, wanting to lie down for a while and then take a bath. Someone calmly told her that she had returned late. Charlotte jumped when she saw His Highness on her bed, sorting through papers. She asked what brought him here, to which the man replied, taking off his glasses, that he had sent a carrier pigeon today. Charlotte had completely forgotten about it. She asked for forgiveness. Reynard heard that the lady was throwing a birthday banquet, and the girl admitted that it was not her wish. His Highness extended his hand to her, and she looked at it questioningly. The man asked with a smile on his face where his invitation was. Charlotte didn't immediately understand that the man was asking if he shouldn't honor her banquet with his presence. The girl asked a counter-question, wouldn't it create some risks if he showed up at her banquet? Reynard smiled. He didn't see the problem. This man in the novel was the one who acted only in his own interests. Charlotte explained that people would find it strange that His Highness was there, and it would become a huge topic of conversation. They will assume that there must be a special reason why the Crown Prince attended the banquet of such a troublemaker as she. Reynard raised an eyebrow. The girl reminded him that her reputation in high society was not very good, and her connection with His Highness would not bring him any benefit. Reynard said he had heard many rumors about her, that she was arrogant and a terrible villain. But didn't she go out today to buy a dress for the banquet? He added that if the rumors about her excessive pride were true, then why did she return empty-handed today? He wondered if others made Charlotte feel uncomfortable. Even the bodyguard asked why she didn't go to another store. The girl wanted to ask how he knew about this, but Reynard, interrupting her, replied that he only believed what he saw, and touched her chin with his thumb. The man moved closer to Lindsay's face, saying that she was not the type to hurt anyone. Charlotte pushed the man away from her sharply, asking if he had been following her today. Reynard asked how it could be otherwise. His eyes were everywhere in the Empire. Charlotte was speechless with shock. Did he really order his people to spy on her? He asked her not to exaggerate, and the girl agreed that the Crown Prince would not have had time to play the stalker. Reynard laughed so hard that he shed a tear. He found it funny to tease Charlotte. The girl replied that she was glad that she had been able to amuse His Highness, but he was still curious about who would come to her banquet. Perhaps Duke Hicklid will be there. Reynard asked if she would be embarrassed if he came, since she had once been in love with him. Charlotte brushed it off by saying that she didn't like him anymore. A grin appeared on the Crown Prince's lips. He admitted it was a relief. Then he said it was time to sleep and that Charlotte should move over, so the girl rolled from one side of the bed to the other. Early in the morning, when the sun's rays had already penetrated the balcony and entered Charlotte's room, Reynard covered the sleeping lady with a blanket. He was surprised how she could sleep so calmly with a stranger. He ran his fingers through a strand of her red hair, remembering Charlotte's words about him setting up surveillance. His Highness actually ordered his men to follow Lindsay and report her every move in minute detail. At first he had suspected her, but now that she was sleeping so carefree in front of him and he was touching her hair, his doubts were dispelled. The girl mumbled something in her sleep, and the Crown Prince abruptly removed his hand, watching Charlotte. The man thought that Duke Hicklid really didn't understand women, because such a wonderful girl was a rarity. Reynard decided that it would still be a great birthday present. When Charlotte woke up, she wasn't even surprised that His Highness wasn't there. She was sorry that without her, he only slept once a week. The girl jumped up from the blood, afraid that the secondary characters would find out that she was the cause of their curses. She rose to her feet and, looking at the ceiling and as if addressing the Almighty, shouted that if this was a romantic fantasy, then there was a way. 3 hours later, the heroine arrived at the temple and sat down in front of the holy statue with wings. A ray of sunlight fell on the image of Charlotte with her hands folded in prayer. The priests who saw her whispered that the villain had finally calmed down, but was her repentance truly sincere? Seeing this reverent pose, the priest said that she must be hearing Yomekna's voice. Charlotte opened her eyes slightly. She thought that without religion there is no way in the world of romantic fantasy. Yomekna is a goddess who was mentioned in the novella In Search of a Husband. She never featured fully in the novel, but was referenced numerous times. Charlotte smiled, thinking that if she was a time traveler, then the chances of communicating directly with the goddess were high. After 2 hours of continuous prayer, her body began to tremble with numbness. The girl already regretted her thoughts during all this time. She had never managed to hear even a sound or hint of him. Yomekna only does what he does, slipping handsome men into her bed. The heroine left the temple with her head down. She hopelessly said that there is no God. Suddenly, a voice was heard saying that the child was in trouble. Black clots appeared in the air. They united in vortices into a single energy. Charlotte froze in fear. The girl immediately began to bow, repenting of her blasphemous thoughts, and the whirlwind passed Charlotte by, forgiving the heroine. The voice called Charlotte to itself. It wanted to help her, but the girl did not see this clot anywhere. She began to look around. Something told her to follow the voice. Although the girl was afraid, she went forward and was asked to open the door ahead. The voice led her to a door in front of which chains lay. It was stained with dried splashes of blood, and above it hung a sign, "Forbidden Zone." Charlotte doubted whether this was the right place, but decided to trust the voice and look inside. A black whirlwind flew into the room and circled the candles burning on the altar. The girl, seeing what was inside, recoiled. In front of the cat statue, a purple seal glowed, with candles lined up around it. The voice asked Charlotte to destroy the statue, and then her troubles would be solved. The girl approached the cat, not understanding how it would help her, but the voice assured her that it could help her because she had already seen its power. The heroine smiled, answering that the whisper in her head and the fact that the room lit up was too weak for an almighty goddess. The voice repeated that she should destroy the statue, then his powers would be restored. The girl was indignant, for this was a cliché phrase of a sealed evil monster. Something promised to give the girl eternal wealth and glory, but the heroine was no pushover. She knew that these were the very phrases that suspicious demons spoke. The voice had already started to get angry. He warned that if Charlotte did not destroy the statue, he would curse her, to which the heroine chuckled. The priest, walking down the corridor, heard a voice. Charlotte turned around, afraid of being caught. As she turned, her elbow hit the statue. It moved towards the floor and shattered into pieces with a loud crack. The heroine was speechless with fear. Even the scream that was trying to escape was silent. The situation was getting tense, as the broken statue looked suspicious, as did the very fact of the restricted area. Charlotte was sweating so much that drop after drop started falling from her face, and new ones were forming. If she was caught, she would lose her head. The girl smiled and asked the voice if it could give her the fame and wealth it had promised, since the statue was broken anyway. The priest saw a cat in the window and calmed down, because nothing terrible had happened. The coachman, who had been waiting for Charlotte in the street, waved the reins and the horses galloped forward. The girl looked out the window, thinking about what happened. She ran out of that room in panic after the statue broke. The voice did not want to do anything for Charlotte, who argued with him. Then she began to ask for forgiveness, killing her pride. In the end, he forgave her only this time. However, despite all this, the novel did not mention the old altar inside the temple. Charlotte's head was too heavy. She wanted to rest as soon as possible. At the estate, she sighed heavily while the maid combed her long hair. Luckily, tonight was one of those nights when no one asked to sleep with Charlotte, and she could gather her strength in solitude. The endless stream of thoughts was abruptly interrupted when the girl looked in the mirror and saw in the reflection that there was a cat sitting on her head. The heroine jumped up from her chair, asking why she had an animal on her head, but the maid did not understand what my lady was talking about. Charlotte grabbed her hair with both hands, which shocked the maid, who screamed at the cat to get off right now. The cat, jumping onto the floor, called Charlotte a rather funny person, and he liked that he followed her. The maid, observing all this, decided that the mistress was very tired, so she left the room, which Charlotte did not notice. She asked the cat if he was that false god. The animal began to get angry, and the girl awkwardly mumbled that she hadn't meant that. She wanted to say that he had personally deigned to come here. The cat scratched his face with his paw. He followed Charlotte to find out what kind of person she was, and warned that he would stay here for a while. Charlotte jerked forward in an attempt to grab the cat. The girl didn't want him to stay there, but the animal pushed her away with its paw. After a while, the girl gave in. She lay down on the floor and began to breathe heavily. The cat told her that only she could see him, so she could forget about trying to drive him out. The girl excitedly asked if he really intended to live with her now, to which the animal answered affirmatively, until he got tired of it. He is an ancient forgotten god, of the same kind as Yomekna, whom everyone reveres. However, they are creatures that are never destined to meet. Charlotte wondered if this meant that she would never have met Yomekna. Perhaps fate itself led her to the temple, and this is one of the 3 tropes about gods. The girl asked the god of darkness if he had a goal to fight against Yomekna, but it would have ended badly for the cat. He explained that due to being sealed for so long, much of his power had faded away, and now he needed to rest and play. Charlotte crossed her arms over her chest. She was worried that Yomekna would punish her because of him, but the cat assured her that they could not directly harm her, because she is not a native of this world. The heroine's gaze changed. She looked down gloomily at the cat, because even the gods could not harm her. The girl turned around and said that she didn't know how he guessed that she was a time traveler, but she was going to bed, so the cat had better not make any noise. She was counting on at least a little politeness from her roommate, but the cat considered her impudent. Time flowed inexorably until the day of the celebratory birthday banquet. Charlotte changed into a white dress with ruffles and bows on the shoulders. She asked Jaden how she looked. Her brother said it suited her, although the style of the dress was different from those she usually wears. The girl awkwardly said that it was her birthday. She just wanted to try something new. She wondered what kind of face Jaden would make if he found out it was a gift from the Crown Prince. Charlotte guessed that Renard felt uneasy when he found out that she hadn't bought herself a dress. She would never have thought he'd come up with something so expensive. Thanks to the Crown Prince, Charlotte wore a white dress for the first time. Such attentiveness is completely unlike Renard. The cat said the dress looked very airy, although he couldn't confirm that it suited her, and Charlotte frowned. She turned to the chair and looked sideways at the cat who had read her thoughts. She thought to herself that he should behave decently. Jaden extended his hand to his sister, inviting her into the hall. The cat settled more comfortably on the soft seat of the chair as the two headed for the exit. Charlotte greeted the distinguished guests and thanked them for coming to the festive banquet, added so they could enjoy the celebration. The Marquise was amazed to see her daughter so friendly, and in a white dress the father was touched. The ladies admired Lady Lindsay's elegant dress and had a feeling that she would set a fashion trend. But there were also those who decided that these ladies had eyes in the back of their heads if they did not understand that Charlotte did not deserve such praise, because who wears a white dress on a birthday? The emerald-haired girl covered her grin with her fan as she looked at Charlotte's dress. The heroine walked through the hall, greeting the guests. She exhaled, seeing that Kiriel had not come, because then Evelyn would have shown up too. Lady Vetten came out to Charlotte and asked her in a friendly, laughing tone how she was doing. It was this girl who had once doused the heroine with champagne. The girl pointed to Charlotte's dress. She complimented it, but she was curious which studio it was from. Lindsay said she didn't quite remember, but Vetten tisked and assured her she knew where it came from, which made Charlotte nervous. The girl, looking Charlotte in the eyes, said that it was obvious that she had stolen him from Lady Bean. Vetten decided that if Charlotte was confused, then she was right, but if not, she wanted Lindsay to explain where she got the dress. The heroine couldn't figure out which answer would be best. She hesitated, worried about her reputation. Just when she thought she was finished, a male voice behind her asked Charlotte if she liked the dress. The 3 ulcers shuddered and were stunned when they saw the man behind Lady Lindsay. The heroine looked back. His Highness took the birthday girl's hand and kissed it tenderly, saying that his taste never fails. Reynard was confident that this dress would suit Charlotte, which he openly admitted. The man looked at the ladies standing in front of them and asked what they thought about this. The guests' attention immediately turned to the Crown Prince. They did not expect to see him at Charlotte's birthday party. Lady Vetten stepped back, surprised, asking if His Highness had given the dress to Lindsay himself. Reynard replied that this was exactly the case, so the ladies should apologize for their ridiculous accusation. Vetten said she was only worried that Lady Bean would be humiliated by Lindsay again. Isla, hearing this, asked the girl if she wanted to say that this was not an attempt to insult Charlotte by using her name. Vetten received her second shock in a matter of minutes when she met Lady Bean at Charlotte's banquet, Isla saying she had received an invitation. The guests began to whisper that their relationship had improved, so Lady Vetten should apologize so as not to aggravate the situation. This girl had no choice but to admit her mistake and apologize. Charlotte told her that everything was fine, although she herself thought that this apology did not seem particularly sincere. The emerald-haired girl stepped back to take a bow, and she didn't notice how she bumped into Jane, who was passing by and politely apologized. She and Ayla looked back at the noise. Lady Vetten fell to the floor, and the guests began to whisper that because of such a disgrace, they would not see this girl in high society for some time. Anger rose in Vetten's throat, and she clenched her teeth, silently asking Charlotte Lindsay to just wait. Reynard asked Charlotte in surprise if she had really sent an invitation to Lady Bean, to which the girl replied that she had not expected her to come. Isla greeted His Highness and thanked Lady Lindsay for the invitation. Charlotte, blushing in embarrassment, thanked Lady Bean for coming. Reynard gasped, remembering that he had forgotten to congratulate the girl, so he did it now. At that moment, the heroine was incredibly happy that she was born. Suddenly, she came to her senses and indignantly told Reynard that he had promised not to come, and that His Highness had indeed originally intended to go hunting with the Duke. And, as happens when you mention someone, Cedric Hicklid showed up on the doorstep asking where Isla was. Turning around, Reynard added that the Duke had insisted that they must definitely stop by for the celebration. Charlotte turned pale. He approached his bride to ask what had happened, but Ayla, on the contrary, asked what he was doing there. The man put his arm around the girl and frowned at Charlotte, asking for any other reason to appear here if not to congratulate her. However, it was obvious to the heroine that he came here only because he was afraid for Isla. Although Charlotte did nothing, she felt uncomfortable under Cedric's gaze. Charlotte wanted to disappear into the ground at that moment. Reynard asked her to wait a minute. Cedric grabbed Isla's hand in front of everyone, saying that Lindsay must have invited her for some hidden evil purpose, but the bride began to defend Charlotte. Reynard called Hicklid. He asked if he shouldn't be the one leaving here. The Crown Prince showed him his invitation envelope, hinting that the Duke had not been invited. Reynard crossed his arms over his chest and added that Lindsay's house was concerned about its reputation, and they wouldn't be happy to have an uninvited guest wandering around the hall. Hicklid hesitated. In this situation he was wrong. His Highness grabbed the Duke by the shoulder. He patted him, laughing, because it was just a joke. He was sure that Lady Charlotte was only glad of his arrival. Reynard leaned close to the Duke's face and quietly said that he was the one Lindsay had once adored, and of course not anymore. Cedric understood everything and replied that he would leave now. Moving away from his comrade, Reynard informed Lady Lindsay that he had gotten rid of the offender, and he suggested that she go to a quiet place to continue the conversation. Charlotte, in dismay, said that it was an honor for her. They went out onto the terrace. Reynard said that he had already gotten used to this place. They leaned against the railing and fell silent. The heroine didn't understand why the man was behaving this way. He should understand that his presence wouldn't do him any good. She also worried whether it was okay to put Cedric in such an awkward position, given the fact that they were political rivals. Reynard called Lady Lindsay's name, and she looked around sharply. He touched her cheek with his finger, asking what she was thinking about so intently. The man was ready to listen to her concerns, but how could he tell a person that her concern was him? He reminded the girl that today was her day, and all these people came to congratulate Charlotte. Isn't that great? The girl agreed, but she thought it would be better to organize a holiday just for the family. But Reynard would be upset if she did that, and besides, he had prepared a gift for her, which surprised Charlotte because he had given her a dress. The man reached for the inside pocket of his tailcoat, saying that the dress alone was not enough. He had not given the most important gift. His fingers touched the thing, and Reynard's voice softened. The man handed Charlotte a box with a ring to ask again if she would agree to become his wife, but the man was interrupted by a loud scream. The girl turned around sharply to see what was going on. Guests crowded the street, covering their mouths with their hands from what they saw. Charlotte and His Highness looked up at the same time. They saw a wyvern tied with a pink ribbon, which Count Mont was hunting, and even the knightly order could not catch it. Following the defeated animal, the commander himself appeared, and the guests whispered whether this was really a gift for Lady Lindsay. Reynard was surprised that Charlotte had invited the Count, although the heroine's jaw almost dropped. Eugen waved his hand, sending a paper airplane towards Lady Lindsay. He flew straight into her arms. Charlotte unfolded the paper airplane and smiled as she read the letter. Reynard watched her, curious about what was written there that caused such a strong reaction in Charlotte. She had never smiled at him like that. Lindsay said she liked his gift. Was that a lie? Although perhaps she liked the wyvern more. His Highness had won Charlotte's favor, and that should have been enough, but he was deeply dissatisfied. Watching my lady's reaction, Eugene thought she liked his gift. He wanted her to praise him and was about to go downstairs. The man paused, hearing the guests discussing his armor, and at the same time that he simply wanted to improve relations with the Marquisate of Lindsay. As if he has any benefit from this, since the Marquisate has significant influence in the capital. Only Eugene knew that this was not the case. The deputy commander told him that it was okay to give something to a lady, as long as others didn't notice. There were people in this place that Eugene felt uncomfortable interacting with. The commander looked over his helmet at the Crown Prince, wondering what he was doing at Charlotte's birthday party. Eugene remembered Ian's words about how dealing with the royal family was always troublesome and should be avoided. It is important for the captain not to forget this, because he has his own mission. The man understood this perfectly well, so he chose to leave the place of celebration, leaving the gift. One look at the commander made the guests shudder, especially with his special gift. Charlotte became excited because his presence really attracted a lot of attention. Reynard kept his eyes on Lindsay, who was suddenly given a gift by the corps leader, although it seemed there was no connection between them. The man caught himself being too preoccupied with this. He turned to Charlotte, and as he passed by, he said that it was time for him to return. He wished her to enjoy the rest of the holiday. It happened too suddenly. Someone called His Highness, but he did not look back. Charlotte raised an eyebrow, wondering if she had done something wrong. He looked upset. Was she really going to get into trouble if she left it like this? The girl jerked from her place after His Highness to quickly find out the reason for his unexpected departure. She ran first onto the terrace, then into the yard. He was nowhere to be found. I even caught and scared 2 lovebirds in one of the rooms. Charlotte started biting her nails out of nerves. It seemed like another romantic cliché had happened, disappearing at a party. Eventually, the banquet ended, and Charlotte still hadn't found Reynard. She went up to the room to tidy herself up. The girl fell face down into the pillow from fatigue. Someone told her that she shouldn't go to bed without removing her makeup, and Charlotte had a feeling of déjà vu. The heroine jumped in fright when she saw Reynard sitting on the bed. He guessed that the party was already over. The man told Charlotte not to worry. He wouldn't be staying there overnight. His Highness got out of bed and headed for the exit. The heroine hastened to call out to him. She asked if he was angry, and the man looked back. He scratched his earlobe thoughtfully, as if asking himself about his feelings. Eventually, Reynard gave in, running his hand through his hair slightly, admitting that she was right. He was angry. But he himself did not fully understand why he was overcome with discontent, and why he waited for her here until the very end. The man walked up to Lady Lindsay and gently took her hand, saying that he knew one thing for sure. He put the ring on her ring finger, making Charlotte blush, and he kissed her hand, confessing that he had wanted to do this ever since he saw Charlotte at the banquet. Reynard leaned toward the lady, closing the distance between them, a smile stretching across his lips. He promised to give her something next time that Charlotte would like more, and it would be better than wyvern meat. The girl wished His Highness good night. She looked at her ring finger and thought, Reynard is a good guy. Her face lit up. He had replenished her safe after her last request, and now he was showering her with gifts. The cat asked if he could go out. Charlotte asked how long he had been there, but she herself had told him to stay in the room. The cat noticed that the man was strange. His fate is distorted by the absolute being of this dimension or some great power. It seems that his destiny, which was destined for him from the very beginning, has been changed. Charlotte thought about it. The cat stretched out on the floor, explaining that all beings in this dimension have a predetermined destiny, but this man's destiny is being interfered with. Charlotte leaned towards the cat, wanting to know why his path had changed, to which the cat calmly replied that it was Yomekna's doing. The girl asked another question. Could it be that Yomekna had put a curse on this bed? The cat did not understand. Charlotte climbed onto the bed, as it would take some time to explain. She warned that she would only say it once, so the cat should listen carefully. Lindsay said with a serious face that this world is the world of a novel, and she is a person who came from outside this story. The cat decided that Charlotte had hit her head, but the girl insisted that she was telling the truth. She thought she was dead, but when she opened her eyes, she found herself in the body of the villain from the novel. The cat touched Charlotte's forehead with his paw and, chuckling, said that her mind seemed to be fine. He assumed that the girl really was from another world, but even if so, this world was not just a fictional story. He could prove it. What if someone from her world looked into this one and wrote down everything they saw in a novel? It sounded plausible, but at the same time, it was a common cliché in stories about the transmigration of souls. Charlotte admitted that her main problem is not whether it is true. She felt sorry for the girl's body that she occupied. The heroine decided to live this life with dignity, so she had a request for the cat. But first, he should not laugh. The cat made a promise. 10 minutes later, his stomach was bursting from what he heard, and tears were streaming from his eyes from laughter. Charlotte simply told him about her past life and the bed curse. The cat, wiping away his tears, apologized. He jokingly asked if the guy also fell under this curse because he did not feel the energy of the curse. God asked if this mess corresponded to the comment the girl had written on the novel, and in essence, her dirty wish had come true. Charlotte asked if there was anything the cat could do to fix it. The cat, scratching his muzzle, replied that power over this dimension belonged to Yomekna, and he could not interfere. The girl began to plaintively ask the cat to ask the goddess herself, because she could sort things out, but the cat reminded her that they were not allowed to cross paths. The cat didn't know how to summon Yomekna, and Charlotte, like a capricious child, began to pound her fists on the bed. God explained that she couldn't just summon the emperor either, and the cat himself didn't want to get involved with Yomekna. Even the fact that Charlotte is from another world doesn't make her special. For Yomekna, she's just a weed in her garden. The heroine didn't expect that gods and romantic fantasy would be so difficult to meet, but suddenly a thought occurred to her. If Ayla is the main character, then Yomekna is probably watching her closely, and if Charlotte is near Ayla, the goddess will notice her. The girl desperately hid her face. Discarding this idea, since it was unlikely that she would succeed, the cat stroked her hair with his paw. God suggested that if her wish had caused the bed curse, perhaps fulfilling it would remove it. Charlotte looked at the cat with frozen tears in her eyes. The cat asked if the girl had simply wanted to be in bed next to them when she wrote that comment. Charlotte replied that she wanted a sweet, loving relationship, and the cat encouraged her to share that love with them. The heroine's face flushed as she realized what the god meant. I saw before my eyes that very restriction with identity and age verification for access to certain scenes. Charlotte picked up the cat and held it above her head, saying indignantly that there was no point in doing so. After all, she is trying to break the curse to stop being tied to men, and the cat tells her to share love, which is contrary to Charlotte's very desire. The girl put the cat on the bed and repeated that she was not the main character. Maybe not yet, but the second male leads will surely fall in love with Ayla, just like in the original story. The cat asked if that was the whole reason. Charlotte reminded that everyone sees her as a villain who torments Isla, and if these male heroes fall in love with her, at worst they can kill her. The cat replied that even if the strange book Charlotte had read accurately described the future of this world, once fate changed, there was no guarantee that it would remain the same. The girl wanted to hear that she didn't seem like she was obsessed with canon, and the cat said, by the way, that she was using terms that only she knew. The heroine collapsed onto the pillow. She wasn't going to force the plot back on track. She just wasn't very confident in herself. Charlotte couldn't answer the question of whether she was truly worthy of love. But she decided to follow the evil god's advice because she was ashamed of the minor characters suffering from insomnia. The cat stepped on Charlotte's stomach with his paws and told her to remember that she was reborn into this world. She needed to start with a clean slate. In the morning, the girl went to the magic tools store. Kirill was upset when he learned that the magic rope had broken. Charlotte asked him point blank if he had sold her a defective product, and the man replied that the rope was capable of holding an animal the size of a house. Kirill apologized to my lady for the inconvenience. He worriedly asked if this was the reason Charlotte had not invited him to her birthday party, because she was offended. The girl blushed at the sight of Kirill, who was both gloomy and touched at the same time. Even so, he looked wonderful. The heroine raised her hands and confidently replied that that was not the case, but her perception of Kirill had changed after her conversation with the evil god. But she explained that she didn't invite him because she thought he would be awkward, since there are a lot of women at the parties. The man seemed to exhale and even laughed. He asked not to worry about it anymore, because he was now diligently studying noble manners. For example, if an aristocrat gives clothes to a commoner, one must be wary. This means that he is telling the girl that she should wear a dress so as not to look like a beggar. Charlotte exclaimed that this was complete nonsense and told Kirill to throw the book away immediately. The man became emotional again, but more intensely, and he felt anxious about wasting his time on wrong advice. Charlotte tried to remember what Isla had advised in such cases, something warm, comforting. Suddenly, it dawned on her after moving into a fantasy world, the girl wrote down the plot of the original story. Like any time traveler, the girl carefully studied the memories of her past life from memory. Kiriel asked Milady what she was looking at with such a smile. Charlotte said that it was nothing like that. Charlotte quickly glanced over the notes and told the man to listen carefully. Firstly, he should decline all gifts worth more than 5 gold pieces. The man began to write down Lindsay's words, who then said that he should try not to exchange personal letters or to be brief. Kiriel was pleased with the list of instructions he received and asked Charlotte how he could thank her. The man remembered that, albeit belatedly, he had prepared a gift for her birthday. He showed Charlotte an autonomous, magical cleaning tool that drives itself and sucks up dust and hair. The heroine wasn't particularly thrilled. It was just a robot vacuum cleaner that had no idea what it was doing in this world. Kiriel mentioned a drawback. The magic stone needed to be replaced, and Charlotte then pointed out that it would be more economical to hire a maid. The man sank because he hadn't even thought about it. He covered his face with his hands, but Charlotte didn't consider it useless. She lifted the magical apparatus from the floor, clasping it in her hands, and with a smile she said that she liked him. How many things in this world become common property after being invented, and Kiriel's invention is just a step in the process of mistakes. Charlotte said that, who knows, maybe in the future his inventions will be used in every home. These words felt like balm to the soul for an inventor. Praise for his work is the most valuable reward. Kiriel asked if he could ask for one more piece of advice. The next day, Charlotte found herself in a bookstore. She changed into ordinary clothes and stepped over the threshold. These clothes were needed so that Evelyn would not suspect anything. This is the place where the stalker who is bothering Charlotte's beloved bunny should appear. She couldn't just stand there and watch as someone threatened the peaceful life of sweet Kiriel. The man regretfully admitted that he was being followed. He said that Lady Evelyn Mosella, with whom he danced at the last ball, had been constantly following him lately. According to Kiriel, Evelyn often appears in this shop, so Charlotte, entering, looked around. Suddenly, she noticed new releases on the shelves. She became curious about what books were popular in the fantasy world, but she was prevented from looking at them. Lady Elena Vetten and her henchmen entered the shop, exclaiming that she did not know that Lady Lindsay could read. Charlotte greeted the girl, who, laughing, asked what kind of rags Lindsay was wearing and whether she had really been kicked out of the house. Vetten laughed at her own joke about Charlotte leaving the house without permission. She wasn't going to give up so easily, because even the confident Charlotte Lindsay, having lost her parents' love, becomes a timid mouse. The heroine replied that she came here for books, and not for pointless arguments. The girl preferred to ignore these individuals. Naturally, Vetten didn't like this. The book fell out of Charlotte's hands, spine first, because Elena grabbed her hand and said, "Enough." It infuriated her that Charlotte was pretending to be repentant and virtuous. Did she really think that Duke Hicklid and Isla would forgive her? Vetten, looking down on Lindsay, made it clear to everyone that Charlotte's intentions were clear. She would pretend to repent, and then start doing bad things again. Elena's supporters also added on top that Lindsay is trying to get out of this mess dry. How base. Before the girl took Charlotte's place, the villain and Elena bullied Isla, and Vetten hid behind Lindsay's scandalous reputation. But if Charlotte is forgiven, next time Vetten herself will be the one facing public condemnation. The heroine pulled her hand from the girl's grip and told her to think what they wanted, because no matter what she said, they would decide in their own way. Vettine shouted that she was not finished yet, but Charlotte walked on without turning around. It was better for her to leave now. Someone politely asked Lady Lindsay to wait. The girl with glasses told Charlotte that she had dropped her book. The heroine thanked the lady, but she could not recognize the person in front of her. Vetten was delighted to meet Lady Mosella unexpectedly. Charlotte couldn't believe that standing in front of her was the same Evelyn who was chasing Kiriel. Mosella turned her gaze to Vetten, asking why such unceremonious people, who gather in a crowd against one, had come here. Elena's excuse was that Lady Lindsay was the first to blame. Evelyn replied that she had been watching from the very beginning and had not noticed Charlotte do anything wrong. Rumors travel fast in high society, so Vetten should be more careful in the future. Elena looked at Evelyn with bewilderment, and even her supporters agreed that they should stop picking on Lindsay. Mosella invited Lady Charlotte to come with her. However, the heroine did not understand why Evelyn was so kind to her. Moreover, she paid for Charlotte's book without even asking. Evelyn smiled, explaining that she had been planning to buy the book too. But Charlotte took it without even looking at the title, but the girl didn't say anything about it. Mosella was delighted to meet someone with the same interests, which left Charlotte stunned. The heroine turned her gaze to the book to find out why Evelyn was so delighted. Charlotte's eyes nearly popped out of her head at the title. The Secret Night of the Noblewoman and the Wandering Magician is a book with a high age limit, and Evelyn invited Lindsay to be friends after seeing her with the same book. The nobility usually looked down on such books, dismissing them as vulgar banality. Naturally, Evelyn Mosella, as the daughter of an aristocrat, was forced to carefully hide her hobby until she met Lady Charlotte. After going to the bookstore, the heroine arranged a quiz for Kirill, asking why Evelyn started stalking him. The man looked down thoughtfully. He wasn't entirely sure. Then the girl slammed a stack of books onto the table. The answer was that Kirill bore a striking resemblance to the wandering mage from the novel. He was embarrassed that he was being compared to a talented, flirtatious, handsome man. Kirill, guessing, asked if Lady Mosella would lose interest in him if he began to behave differently. Charlotte couldn't answer for sure, because the image that had been formed wasn't so easy to erase. The girl looked at Kirill, thinking that after she heard the words of the evil god and looked at the magician as a man, things went beyond admiration for appearance. Charlotte's heart was about to burst, especially when Kirill asked so sweetly with a blush on his cheeks, there had to be a way. The cat, yawning on the table, asked if the sweet romance was so far away. Charlotte touched Kirill's shoulder and asked him not to worry, because she had found a way out. She grabbed the white sheets of paper from the table and threw them into the air, where they began to slowly float around the room. The solution to the problem was to publish a new novel that would be much more interesting than this one. Kirill was stunned and asked again. Charlotte replied that now was not the time to be in a daze. First, she needed to find out Lady Mosella's tastes. The man said that Charlotte didn't have to go that far, but the heroine was persistent, since until now he had been fighting alone. Kirill was surprised and excited. He didn't know how to thank the girl. After leaving the Tower of Magicians, he worked tirelessly at court, trying to integrate into noble society. Kirill smiled at everyone he met to gain their favor. And he gave them beautiful flowers that he grew with his own hands, but this was the wrong path. And the misunderstandings became more and more numerous. No matter how hard Kirill tried, people refused to communicate with him. The girls trampled his flowers and shouted that playing with feelings was vile without support, and the opportunity to be frank, the magician began to get tired. Kirill even thought about returning to the magic tower, but was afraid to burden his master. He had almost resigned himself to the idea that he would have to continue living in complete solitude. But now Kirill was smiling, thanking Charlotte for her kindness. The evil god slept peacefully, curled up by the window. Charlotte was full of enthusiasm. She was going to give it her all and show the dignity of someone with many years of reading experience. After a sleepless night, the heroine went to Evelyn's house, who joyfully greeted her. This was Charlotte's second visit to her. The girl noticed how Mosella had changed since their last meeting, and a dissonance arose in her head. Was this really the same person? Over tea, Evelyn apologized for being too harsh at the last tea party. She suggested that Charlotte liked Kirill, and emotions got the better of her. The heroine invited the lady to discuss that very novel, a new unpublished edition that was hard to get hold of. Charlotte said she wasn't sure it would ever be published. She whispered in Evelyn's ear that the content was extremely, extremely explicit. Mosella laughed when Charlotte said that such novels were not vulgar fiction, but works of art that expressed emotions. The heroine hoped that the lady would share her impressions with her after reading. Evelyn was only too happy. She wanted to read other novels with Charlotte today and discuss them in detail. The heroine mentally sighed, hoping that this woman would stop following Kirill, because the manuscript she gave him was a masterpiece that they created together in 3 days. A wave of goosebumps ran down the man's shoulders. Reynard asked himself what had just happened. Charlotte stretched as she approached the carriage. A day spent reading was tiring, even if the book was good. She noticed Kirill, who immediately thanked the girl for her efforts. Charlotte thanked him for coming all this way to meet her. He extended his palm to her, and the heroine, barely having time to touch it with her fingers, remembered that she was not allowed to touch Kirill. Charlotte raised an eyebrow, watching the man's reaction, who did not recoil in shock, but offered to get into the carriage. He held her hand tenderly and was absolutely calm. Was it possible that Kirill had gotten used to Lindsay over the past few days? In the carriage, the man mentioned that Charlotte had recently spoken about sedatives, and he could give them as a token of gratitude, but the girl no longer needed them. The man insisted, but the girl waved him off, saying what else are friends for? Kirill suddenly fell silent, his lips frozen. For some reason, the phrase about friends fell like a shadow on his heart. The cat reminded Charlotte that only love could break the curse. but she ruined everything by telling Kirill that they were friends. The girl did not understand why the evil god was scolding her. She explained herself by calling her words a calculated strategy to exploit the cliché of going from friends to lovers. In novels, the hero and heroine always insist that they are just friends before they fall in love, and the more they define the relationship, the higher the chances. After all, the cat saw them yesterday, she and Kirill. It looked promising. The cat didn't really notice. Then Charlotte exclaimed furiously that he would see. Soon all the secondary characters would fall in love with her. Jaden sat at his desk, holding a pen in his fingers and writing. He looked up at Charlotte when she said he should be grateful. The girl was lying on the sofa with a plate of sweets and gobbling up one cookie after another. Her brother asked what she meant. Charlotte tilted her head back to look at her brother and replied that of all the romantic stories, not a single one had a marquise's son with red hair as the protagonist. Evelyn had already managed to send the heroine a letter in which, judging by her size for Reynard, she had fallen head over heels in love with him after reading Charlotte's novel. The girl stood up and said that the marquise's son with red hair would not be able to compete in popularity. Red hair was too much of an acquired taste. Jaden didn't understand why he had to listen to statements about his unpopularity anyway. The hunting tournament was just around the corner. The brother wanted to know if Charlotte would take part in it. The arrow of events in the girl's head changed and stopped at the hunting tournament. In novels, this is where the most important and dramatic events always take place. Or the hero and heroine become close when they find themselves alone in the wild. Or the heroine's life is in danger due to suddenly appearing enemies. Or a jealous protagonist and a supporting character compete to bring her the biggest game, bickering at every turn. This culminating event, where youth and romance boil, is a true gem of a story. Charlotte didn't even think about it. She would definitely take part. Jaden replied that she should start practicing embroidery. Traditionally, ladies embroider a handkerchief and give it to the gentleman they want to support at a competition. The day of the hunting tournament was just around the corner, and on a beautiful sunny day, under the warm rays, the camp was set up. Charlotte clutched the white handkerchief in her hand. Her embroidery was so-so. Jaden noticed his sister was wearing a hunting suit and asked why she needed it if she didn't even hunt, to which the girl replied that she needed something practical. Besides, it's summer now, and wearing layers in this heat means voluntarily consenting to torture. Jaden walked up to Charlotte and pulled the bow off her shoulders, saying he was confiscating it. The girl reached out to her brother to get a weapon. She needed it to defend herself from the killers hunting the main character. Charlotte didn't even know how to shoot a bow, so Jaden didn't see the point. The girl nervously bit her fingernail, thinking about Plan B. The appearance of His Highness the Crown Prince was solemnly announced at the tournament. Reynard was dressed in white, his cloak fluttering behind him, declaring his status as His Highness. The Crown Prince greeted everyone gathered at the tournament by order of the Emperor. He would preside over the hunting competitions. Charlotte wondered if even in the novel the Emperor never attended a hunting tournament, and whether the rumors about the illness were true. And the retinue of the Crown Princess, who is Reynard's damned opponent, has not yet arrived, so perhaps there will be no assassins this time. Regardless, Charlotte was determined to win the heart of a minor character to break the curse. And this time her target was shining right before her eyes in all its glory. His Highness Reynard. Jaden warned his sister that he was leaving, asked her not to cause problems, but Charlotte did not hear him. She was thinking about giving the handkerchief to Reynard. Suddenly, someone behind Charlotte whispered her last name. This aura seemed familiar to the girl. She looked around. Evelyn Mosella covered her mouth with her hand when she saw the handkerchief in Lindsay's hand. Her eyes widened, her gaze piercing Charlotte's soul, as Mosella asked if Lindsay was really going to give the scarf to His Highness. The heroine tucked her handkerchief behind her arm and replied that she had no interest whatsoever in the Crown Prince. Evelyn leaned towards the girl and asked in a calm but pressing tone who Charlotte was going to give it to then. The girl closed her eyes and quickly pointed her finger at the person standing to the side. She just decided to give it to at least someone. Charlotte glanced sideways, and only now did she see that she had pointed at Eugene himself. His gaze seemed to flash from under his helmet. Evelyn giggled, calling Charlotte's choice quite peculiar, and decided not to interfere with the heroine. In truth, the heroine forgot about Eugene because he rarely appears in the plot. Charlotte noticed that everyone was reacting strangely. Even Jaden was horrified as the ladies tried to hand him the embroidered scarf. The heroine felt sorry for Eugene, because in fact he is a good person. It's just that no one notices it. The girl clutched the handkerchief in her hand. She approached the commander, despite the sidelong glances, and held out a white handkerchief with a crookedly embroidered heart. She put a piece of herself into it. The man slowly lowered his gaze to the girl's hand. Charlotte asked the Count to accept this gift, so the girl changed course to Eugene. She smiled, but mentally scolded herself for what she had just done. Is it really because of her that Count Mont will now become the subject of even more gossip? As much as she wanted to win Eugene's heart, it was too selfish. Charlotte was going to come up with an excuse. The only thing she said was, "Wow." The Count repeated after her questioningly. Charlotte laughed awkwardly, clutching her handkerchief, and said that wyvern meat was indeed very healthy. And Eugene even helped Charlotte catch a pickpocket in all the chaos. She didn't have time to properly thank him. People who heard that it was a gift of gratitude thought it was logical. Jaden shouted to his sister from the crowd. The man in the helmet accepted the handkerchief and, looking at it, modestly thanked Charlotte. The girl was happy because now she was saved. However, this angered someone so much that his hand clenched. Reynard had been watching Lindsay all this time, wondering why she had given the handkerchief to Eugene and not to him. Since the birthday banquet, he still couldn't understand Charlotte, much less his mood swings. He looked at the girl, wondering who she was. But now was not the time to worry about the young lady. The hunting tournament was more important to Reynard. He remembered his mother standing with a dagger in her hand and telling him that he should never forget about the throne. His Highness could not allow the Empress, who so longed for his mistake, to see his blunder. Inside the family tent, Jaden spoke with Charlotte alone, wanting to understand what his sister was thinking when she handed a handkerchief to such a dangerous man as Count Mont. The girl replied that Eugene had given her a birthday present and helped with the thief, but that this was not enough for her brother. There are many rumors about him that he is a ruthless beast who harms others without any regret. These words about rumors hurt Charlotte. She stood up from her chair, asking what was wrong with her. From these rumors, doesn't she seem like anything other than a villain who oppresses others? Jaden was quick to explain to his sister that that wasn't what he meant. A tense silence hung in the air. The guy turned around, offering to continue this conversation after the hunt, but for now, Charlotte should stay here. It was not safe outside. Left alone, the girl stood in the same place for a while, her head down, her hands clenched into fists. The heroine walked up to the table and started packing her things. She couldn't just stay here and listen to Jaden. Charlotte started to run, thinking of Eugene, who looked unwell. His hand was clearly shaking as he accepted the handkerchief. It had been more than 10 days since they had last slept together at Charlotte's. How could she have forgotten? The girl ran past the warning sign, lost in her own thoughts and scolding herself for having been more careful. In the forest, Lindsay was caught by the rain and stopped by a tree. The girl's clothes were wet, her body began to shiver from the cold, and she began to curse this fantasy world without a weather forecast. Charlotte closed her eyes, repeating to herself where Eugene was, when suddenly someone answered her, asking if she had called him. The heroine looked up and involuntarily answered that she had called. It was only when she realized it was Eugene standing in front of her that Charlotte froze. The man covered the girl from the rain, asking why she was looking for him. He said that she had heard what they were saying about them, and that she shouldn't be with him, because then they will hate her. Charlotte quietly mentioned his name. It turns out that he, too, knew about the rumors that had spread. People may simply say that they feel sorry for each other because they both find themselves in a similar situation. The girl extended her palm forward. She wrapped her arms around the man's neck. Right now, she just wanted to comfort him. Charlotte leaned against Eugene's shoulder, replying that she didn't care about their empty words. The man turned his head towards her in surprise when Charlotte said that she was more worried about him, and she was already infamous as a villain who tormented the heroine. Eugene didn't understand what they were talking about, and Charlotte decided to change the subject, because what was more important was how many days he hadn't slept. Count Mont could not remember what had happened so terribly, and Charlotte asked why he had not yet come to her room. The reason was much deeper. Eugene was worried that Lindsay was somehow connected to the crown prince. They kept telling him that for the sake of the goal they must beware of the royal family, and the commander did not know what to do. Charlotte gasped loudly and quickly removed the count's helmet. He blushed, a bead of sweat running down his cheek. The girl gently touched his face. She assumed that due to lack of sleep, Eugene was already seeing all sorts of things. He needed to rest. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat and she gasped again, her eyelids growing heavy. The heroine swayed forward, but Eugene managed to hold her back, the girl who had lost consciousness. He was scared and she worried him. Charlotte was completely red and couldn't stand on her feet. Steam was coming out of her mouth. Eugene screamed her name, and the scream was dispersed with a loud clap of thunder. The soaking wet shirt hung on a branch next to the helmet. Eugene carried the girl to the nearest cave to get out of the rain, lit a fire inside and covered Charlotte with his cloak. The man looked at the crackling fire, then at her, but his gaze lingered on Charlotte for much longer. The girl stopped shaking. Her pale skin was illuminated by the firelight, and her breathing was quiet. Eugene touched her forehead to check if the fever had gone away. Luckily, Charlotte was feeling better. His hand trembled and froze as the girl rolled over, muttering something under her breath. She woke up and, seeing Eugene, sat up, while the man turned away in embarrassment, holding his own hand. The heroine moved closer and asked worriedly if he was okay, to which Count Mont answered in the affirmative. The girl grabbed the commander's face with both hands and pulled him towards her. She asked why then there were such circles under his eyes on his beautiful face. Charlotte considered this a great loss for humanity and that he needed to get some sleep immediately. While the girl was fiddling with the blanket and pillow which were soaked, Eugene looked at her thoughtfully, wondering if he really looked that bad. Charlotte said it wouldn't be entirely comfortable, but he could use her arm as a pillow. Seeing that the girl's condition was still precarious, the commander placed his hand on her shoulder, covering Charlotte with a cloak. He looked into her eyes and asked Lindsay not to strain herself so much. After all, she has a cold, she needs to sit by the fire. Clutching the cloak thrown over her shoulders with her hands, the girl only now realized that she was naked, and moreover, she had missed the moment when they found themselves in the cave. Charlotte sat down by the fire, and Eugene hugged her from behind, warming her. The Count thought that this girl had lost consciousness because of the fever, and when she woke up, she was still worried about him. She went out into the forest to look for him, perhaps because she was worried that he had not slept for several days. Even though everyone avoids Eugene, when he's around, nothing but misfortune happens. The man hugged Charlotte tighter, as if he had found something precious. He touched Charlotte's head with his chin, quietly saying that he didn't want to let her go. The girl warmed up and fell asleep in his strong arms, in which sleep felt much deeper and safer than in her own cozy bed. The Count listened to Charlotte's measured snoring and looked at the fire. He thought how soft and warm she was, and with these thoughts he closed his eyes. The boy ran to the cave, shielding himself from the rain with his hand. He sighed heavily, for what had the commander been thinking when he decided to go deep into the forest in the midst of the hunt? The guy stopped, looking ahead in surprise. He saw the captain sleeping defenselessly with the woman he was hugging. After that, Charlotte did not remember how they returned to the camp. She sat in the tent and sneezed every now and then, admitting to herself that she had caught a cold. Jaden said that it served her right, and she shouldn't even think about running away again tomorrow, because he was going to watch her every move. The girl asked through her nose how the hunting tournament was going. Her brother told her that he was not interested in first place. However, as far as he understands, first place is already predetermined. Blood sprayed past Reynard, his face not even moving. His Highness the Crown Prince dealt mercilessly with a bunch of dangerous animals and did not stop for a moment to rest. The boy asked His Highness if it was enough, since the sun had long since disappeared behind the horizon. Reynard's cold gaze flashed in the rain. He said it wasn't enough. The man took a step through a pool of blood. It wasn't enough for him one iota. If he wants to live up to the title of future emperor, he must not stop. The guy, crossing his arms over his chest, warned the captain not to think about running away. Eugene turned away, saying that he hated hunting and would run away. The boy asked what this meant, because the commander must take first place in order to win the respect of the nobility. However, that's what Ian thought, and the nobility hates them, so Eugene doesn't care. The guy covered his face with his hand and wearily shook his head, replying that they were former mercenaries from another country, and the captain was generally averse to any communication. It was no wonder they didn't like him. But their advantage lies elsewhere. Once others realize how useful their blades are, even the Empire's enemies will begin to take an interest in their squad. The guy was about to repeat what their goal was, but the captain interrupted him. He remembered. He grabbed the sword in its sheath and said that their goal was the Emperor's head. The boy sighed. Sometimes it was difficult for him to understand what was on the captain's mind. Before he could even blink, Eugene had fled again. The man went into the forest again, walking stealthily past bushes and trees. A smile came across his face when he saw her. Charlotte looked around. She was wearing a light dress and shoes that suited her radiant image so well. Romance novels have countless ways for protagonists to fall in love, but more often than not, it's through clichés. Charlotte had never been able to create a successful love story, so she prepared thoroughly and sat down to write. She created a strategy to win the heart of the second main character. The girl was confident that her plan was flawless. and that very soon she will lift the curse from Eugene. While walking through the forest with the Count, the girl asked if he really wasn't going hunting today. The man calmly replied that she herself said that it was better not to go there. He suddenly asked Charlotte if she didn't want to become a Lady of Fame. He wanted to thank her for the scarf she gave him. Lady of Glory is a title given to a woman who presents her kerchief to the participant who achieves the highest result in a hunting tournament. If a participant receives several scarves, the title goes to several ladies at once, and the situation becomes a bit funny. However, every noble young lady dreams of becoming a Dame of Fame at least once. Although Charlotte thought it was funny, they don't bet on racehorses. The day before, Jaden had come running to his sister to tell her how Reynard had dealt mercilessly with the monsters. The heroine wanted to know why His Highness was so obsessed with the desire to win. Eugene placed his hand on the girl's head and leaned slightly towards her. The man was worried, but Charlotte did not have a fever. The girl instantly blushed, and the man added that there was now a fever. Charlotte turned away. Eugene explained that she suddenly became silent, so he thought she might faint, but the girl felt fine. The heroine couldn't calm down, because now was the perfect chance for a real cliché. She clenched her hands, gathering her courage. Charlotte stammered that she wanted to tell Eugene something. Suddenly she sneezed so hard that she leaned forward. The Count was worried that she was still ill, but the girl simply had something in her nose. Suddenly, Charlotte noticed that her notebook was missing, and when she looked back, she saw it floating down the river. The man rushed forward to get it, but the girl grabbed Eugene by the shoulder, assuring him that everything was okay. Then he will catch a cold, although in fact Charlotte was worried about her notes. He should not see them. Count Mont replied that he never caught cold. They sat down on the riverbank, and Charlotte suddenly remembered that Eugene had come to the Empire with the Heart Mercenary Squad, and 3 years ago he had been given the title of Count. He visited many countries, but why did he settle here? Looking at the river, the man answered seriously that he had a dream. Eugene couldn't reveal any details, but coming to the Empire was one step towards its realization. Charlotte looked at her reflection in the water and remembered that the commander's dream was mentioned several times in the novel, but it was never revealed. According to the story, Eugen is originally from Nayuta, a country that fell 20 years ago and may have sworn allegiance to the emperor in order to resettle the survivors in the empire. Charlotte smiled and said that she would root for him and let his dream come true. The man objected, saying that Lindsay didn't even know what he was dreaming about. Charlotte replied that whatever it was, if it was his dream, it was worth fighting for. Eugene froze. He gasped and, after a short silence, thanked the girl for such words. He suddenly got up to go hunting. Since Charlotte supported him and his dream, he decided to give it his all. The girl was surprised but did not interfere, although she did not understand what hunting had to do with it. Eugene ran, shouting to Charlotte that they would see each other tomorrow. The girl also stood up. There was no point in being here any longer. Just as she was about to leave, she suddenly realized that she didn't remember which way the camp was. She decided to go straight ahead, because if she went that way, she would sooner or later stumble upon the right place, but after an hour, this had borne no fruit. Charlotte froze abruptly, hearing a menacing, drawn-out roar behind her. Her body seemed to be paralyzed. Trembling, the girl slowly turned back to the huge shadow that covered her head to toe. A huge bear, drooling from its mouth, stood up on its hind legs, swinging its long claws. Charlotte's heart sank and she lost consciousness. The bear crouched down next to her, checking to see if she was dead or not, while behind him, a cat's figure appeared from the black clot. An incredibly evil aura behind him made the beast freeze, and a voice ordered him to disappear. The bear ran away. When Charlotte woke up, black-gloved hands were holding her shoulders. The purple-haired boy asked if she was okay. The girl sighed so quietly that he had to lean towards her to hear it. Charlotte called him handsome and fainted again. The evil god gasped, not knowing how to respond to this. First, she lost the notebook she had been working on so hard, and now she had fallen unconscious. The guy said that he decided to quietly follow her because he was worried, and apparently for good reason. Charlotte really knows how to cause trouble. Before the girl found herself in the world of this novel, she was an ordinary college student who treated a guy to lunch who always forgot his wallet. Sohn had never been good at refusing people, which often led to losses, but asking her to pay for lunch again was already impudent. However, the boy was beaming with beauty. He knew that the girl was working part-time, and he promised that this would be the last time. Enchanted, Sohn was ready to give him her last. Handsome men have always been her biggest weakness, and this didn't change even after she was transported to another world. Charlotte couldn't get that purple-haired guy out of her head. She muttered about his hair, his graceful hands, and she wondered if he had carried her to the barracks. Charlotte decided to ask Jaden if he had seen the stranger. The younger brother slammed the book shut and interrupted, saying that it was good that Charlotte had sat quietly and peacefully in the barracks yesterday instead of wandering around. The girl realized that Jaden hadn't even noticed she was missing, so now she couldn't even ask about the guy her brother was just as calmly talking about the award ceremony. During the ceremony, His Highness stood on a pedestal, people praising him and shouting congratulations. The man waved to the crowd, saying he felt awkward handing the grand prize to himself. Jaden was Reynard's biggest fan. Even now he was crazy about him, but Charlotte wasn't surprised that His Highness took first place. Looking behind the Crown Prince, Charlotte thought about how many animals he had killed. Reynard was like a monster in the flesh. She wondered who came in second place, if it was Eugene. It soon turned out that it was not. Charlotte assumed it was too difficult to catch up with the others in just one day, when suddenly Jaden told his sister to look up. A huge bird soared into the clear sky, its beak wrapped in a thick rope. Tears were dripping from the beast's eyes, and Eugene was sitting astride it. Charlotte's mouth dropped open at what she saw, and Jaden tensed. The commander jumped off the bird in mid-flight. He landed on his feet from a great height, so that the force of the fall caused the ground beneath him to break. On his back hung a huge red phoenix egg. It was very rare. The man asked if the awards ceremony was over. Reynard replied that, unfortunately, just now. He smiled at Count Mont and said that he was sorry that he had brought such a rarity, and all in vain, and he himself wondered if Eugene had really gone far into the mountains because he had cleared the entire area of monsters. Eugene repeated the word in vain, like an echo. And he said that he would then present this phoenix egg to His Majesty the Emperor and Her Majesty the Empress. Reynard's gaze changed. It became cold, piercing. His blue eyes resembled ice floes when the Count mentioned the Empress. The nobles began to whisper they did not understand why they were giving the egg to the Empress, who had not even shown up at the hunting festival. Could it be that a detachment of mercenaries had sided with her? An hour earlier, the mercenary told the captain to take this egg to the competition before it was too late. It's quite a rare thing. You just need to take it there and say that Eugene wants to give it to the Emperor and Empress. Then the commander will earn the favor of not only their majesties, but also the lady he is trying to impress. The mercenary told him this, and Count Mont flew to the camp with trepidation, thinking about Charlotte. But as soon as Eugene jumped off the bird and saw the people's looks, he thought Ian was a liar. No matter how much the Count hunted, it was all to no avail. He turned around, worried about how he would even show himself to Charlotte after this. Reynard noticed that the Count had just been looking at Lady Lindsay. Obviously something was going on between the two. That night a banquet was held to celebrate the end of the hunting festival. Charlotte initially thought the purple-haired man might be a participant, but he wasn't at the banquet either. Suddenly someone approached Lady Lindsay and she flinched, almost spilling her alcohol. It was the Crown Prince, asking for a moment. She and the man walked behind the tent. Charlotte felt awkward and laughingly congratulated Reynard on his victory, but he gloomily said that he would be straightforward. The Crown Prince turned around and asked what her relationship was with Count Mont. Charlotte was stunned. Then Reynard asked again why she gave the handkerchief to Eugene and not to him. The heroine thought about how to explain to this man that she was trying to seduce the commander in order to remove the curse, and she herself replied that he helped her. Looking upset, Reynard asked Charlotte if she hadn't wanted to be his lady of honor. The girl said that His Highness had already given her a well-deserved gift last time, but the man noticed that she was not wearing the ring he had given her. The head of the mercenaries sided with the Empress. His actions did not arouse suspicion, but now everything became clear to the Crown Prince. However, there was something that bothered Reynard even more, and he asked Lindsay directly if she was on his side. Charlotte looked at the Crown Prince in surprise. She didn't understand what he was talking about. Reynard covered his flushed face with his hand, asking forgiveness for forgetting himself for a moment, but he wanted to know what Charlotte wanted if the ring was weighing on her so much. He was ready to give her everything she wanted, she just had to ask, and in his mind he was thinking about how she would stay with him always. Charlotte took this as Reynard's concern that she would not lend him her bed again. She remembered that His Highness loved to make deals, so perhaps this was one of them. Suddenly the girl asked Reynard if he could help her find one person. The Crown Prince asked again in surprise. The cat called Charlotte, who was reading a book. He asked if it had ever occurred to her that she was living too lazily and aimlessly. The girl sat up and replied that not really. The cat was indignant, because how was Lindsay going to lift the curse if she did nothing all day but lie around in her room? But Charlotte didn't see anything wrong with that. She called the cat a useless god who was incapable of anything. His fur stood on end at these words, and Charlotte added that he couldn't even find a person. The cat thoughtfully scratched his muzzle with his paw, asking if the girl really needed that guy with purple hair so much. Charlotte enthusiastically replied that since she had entered a fantasy world, she was obliged to meet as many handsome men as possible. She did not thank him properly. The girl raised her hands, assuring the evil god that he could not understand her. She began to tell about the attack of a huge bear in the forest, but the cat interrupted her, asking how her determination could lift the curse. Charlotte remembered that she had lost the diary where she had written down the entire plan, and the cat suggested making a new one. The girl thought about it. There were a few things she always wanted to try if she ever found herself in a romantic fantasy. Charlotte wrote these things down on parchment and showed it to the cat to hear his opinion. The girl indicated on her wish list that she wanted to slap the head maid to put her in her place, and the cat asked why. Charlotte replied that it was a classic of the genre and just a little dream, but after that incident with the thief, all the servants were replaced, and now they treat her kindly. The cat read the following points and asked what it was all about, where it was written that Charlotte wanted to become a secret genius spirit mage, earn admiration, and make a lot of money. The girl picked up a pen, thinking along with the cat about what else to write down. Just when she wrote down that she wanted to be a character in a show watched by divine beings, the evil god stopped her because these are all things that cannot be achieved by one's own efforts. Charlotte said in surprise, why shouldn't she dream of great things if she found herself in the body of a character from a novel? After all she has is the title of a villain and a curse. The cat asked if she still believed that they were inside the book, but Charlotte was adamant she was going to prove it one day. Jaden grabbed the door handle and slowly pulled it towards him. He wanted to tell his sister that she had received a letter, but the moment he walked in, she raised her hands to the ceiling and shouted for the status window to open. Charlotte, shaking under the blanket with shame, said that she wanted to die, but the cat thought that it was her own fault because she did not hear the knock. Moreover, if she dies, she will not be able to fulfill the next point, to become God's chosen one, to awaken as the most holy virgin. The girl peeked out from under the blanket and quietly said that if the evil god had not been so useless, she would have achieved this long ago. The cat was furious at her words, and Charlotte was distracted by the letter. It was from Reynard, but he usually sent letters by carrier pigeon, but now he sent them directly to the house. The letter said that His Highness had found the man Charlotte had asked about, and the cat's fur stood on end. Reynard believed that this was Macbeth's courtier Karen, whose portrait had purple hair, and he was participating in a hunting tournament. When she reached the line about whether Charlotte was looking for this man with some unclean intentions, she crumpled the letter, calling the cat to go with her. She picked him up and held him above her head, telling him that it was dangerous to wander alone in such a fantasy world, but the cat was still angry that she called him useless. Charlotte placed the cat on her head, replying that two are better than one, and the evil god is the only one she could rely on, because if something goes wrong, she counts on him to save her. The very next day, the carriage was harnessed, and Charlotte Lindsay set off to her address. The cat sat on the girl's head and stared at the person sitting opposite. She said that he was the only one she could rely on, but at the same time she took the night with her. Charlotte silently told the cat that she just thought a bodyguard wouldn't hurt. When they arrived at their destination and stepped out into the yard, a long silence fell at the sight of the gray house overgrown with ivy. Calix asked the lady if she was sure that the man she was looking for lived here. The place looked abandoned. It was hard to imagine that anyone lived in this house. The knight decided to check. He knocked on the door, asking if anyone was there. A second later, Calix raised his fists in defense as someone from inside pushed the door with all his might. It didn't help. When Charlotte heard the noise, she saw the door knocked down along with the knight who was thrown into the air. Calix fell head over heels into the bushes in the yard. Charlotte asked worriedly if he was okay, when suddenly the cat shouted at the girl to look forward. The blade of a dagger flashed at her neck as she tried to turn around, a male voice telling her not to move. Seeing the dagger in front of her nose, the girl turned pale and panicked. The cat tried to calm her down, but Charlotte was not herself. She was shaking all over. Her legs were giving way. The girl slowly turned to the man and quietly said that she had not done anything to him. At the sight of this extremely purple man with one strand of hair on his forehead, the girl was taken aback because this was not at all the person she was looking for. He shouted sharply that if they took even one step, the woman would die. Charlotte closed her eyes in fear. She glanced furtively at the man, realizing he was not speaking to her. The man he was talking to stopped, blue light falling on his shoes. In his hand, Kirill held a sword of living lightning, which sparkled, and particles of its discharge hovered around. He looked the man in the eye and said that it was mean of him to resort to hostage-taking.